Heavenly Father, today we put on the full armor to protect us against attack. We put on the belt of truth to protect against lies and deception. We put on the breastplate of righteousness to protect our hearts from the temptations. We put the gospel of peace on our feet to walk in your light, peace, and freedom with the Holy Spirit. We rebuke anxious thoughts. We take up your shield of faith for protection to block and destroy all the darts and threats thrown at us by the enemy. We put on the helmet of salvation to cover our minds and thoughts, reminding us that we are children of a mighty King. We are forgiven, set free, saved by the blood of Jesus. We take up the sword of the Spirit, your living word, that has the power to demolish strongholds and is sharper than any double-edged sword. We come to you, Lord, in prayer daily. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen. What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm excited to bring back someone who has become a podcast regular on The Imagination, certified clinical trauma professional, certified sex offender treatment provider, licensed professional counselor, founder of Survivor Support, podcast host of his own podcast and channel, father of three, husband to his high school sweetheart, survivor advocate, and someone you all heavily request to bring back over and over again, John Uhler. In case you're new here or missed John's briefing on his background on the first episode we did together, here is a short recap of John's many accolades and credentials. John's work began over 30 years ago, and the evolution of his career path is nothing short of astounding. His education includes attending Epic Bible College, Biola University, Talbot School of Theology, and California State University in Fullerton. He's worked in both clinical and administrative capacities, outpatient and hospital settings, intensive day treatment settings, residential treatment programs, and in secure facilities, including over 11 years on psychology staff within the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, where he's logged more clinical contact hours within solitary confinement than any psych staff in the entire United States. Prior to his work with incarcerated men, he spent years working with sexual abuse survivors and treating severely emotionally disturbed adolescents in group homes and within the largest intensive psychiatric residential treatment facility for troubled youth west of the Mississippi. When John is not providing professional therapy or podcasting, he serves in an advocacy role toward helping increase safety for vulnerable women and minors who are being placed in harm's way by those pushing dangerous ideologies, public policies, and legislation. John's recurring spot on The Imagination has been so incredibly valuable, and so many of you have reached out saying how much you value the information he's been providing and presenting. The therapeutic element is a giant piece of the puzzle, as we have to help helpers willing to step in and help survivors both understand what they went through and how to heal it. Unfortunately, as you have all heard countless times on this show, getting proper help for something like dissociative identity disorder or finding someone willing to accept that things like satanic ritual abuse exist can be harder than it should be for a survivor in recovery. John provides a refreshing take on healing by being able to provide very logical, scientific, and clinical explanations to extreme trauma in ways that demystify the false memory lies that typically accompany patients with recovered memories and dissociation. And this happened all because he cared. Our hope with this series is that it can be of value for survivors to better understand what to expect in their healing journey with a therapist, and that it can be of equal value to any helpers and therapists walking alongside a survivor in their healing journey. On today's episode, we are going to continue building on the foundations John has laid out for us and continuing our journey into understanding the inner world of a survivor system and parts. John has so graciously put together a very thorough and interactive visual for us to follow along with what he's saying. So if you are listening on Spotify or iTunes, please feel free to go find us on YouTube if you'd like to see the presentation at the same time as you're listening. John is a hero for not turning a blind eye when it came to things like satanic ritual abuse and extreme trauma. And all that I ask of you on the other side is that you please give him your full attention while he presents this groundbreaking information to us. My third secret hope in having John on the show is that he will inspire a new wave of practicing and inspiring therapists to have the courage to follow in his footsteps. And I couldn't think of a better person than John to champion this movement for our wounded warriors. Before I finish introducing today's guest, I wanted to give just a couple reminders and updates. If you'd like to be on the podcast as a guest or share any information privately with me, please feel free to email me at imagineabetterworld2020@gmail.com. You can also use this same email if you'd like to be a part of my new book series featuring written survivor testimonies. You can find the video with all the details on how to submit your testimony on any of my podcast channels. And lastly, I'd love your support on Substack, where I'm taking up investigative journalism as an outlet for me to share about the podcast, guests, and my advocacy work. And you can subscribe to me there at www.emmacatherine.substack.com. All my links will be in the show notes, and I'd love your support across all platforms, you guys. Thank you so much for caring so deeply about survivors and for helping to make this the safest space on the internet for survivor disclosures. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming today's guest of honor, selfless man of God, voice for the voiceless, child abuse and survivor advocate, podcaster, and therapeutic warrior, the one, the only, John Uhler. John, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Well, thank you. And it's a pleasure to be back with you.
This has been a really awesome series. I haven't done anything like this yet on the podcast where it's just sort of built on each other. There's different episodes, especially we do some Q&A a lot of times in the beginning where you can sort of pop in on an episode and maybe not have to listen to everything. But my suggestion for people listening, whether it's your first time or if you've seen a few episodes, is to listen to all of it. These are such valuable tools that John's giving us. And this education, a lot of people won't touch, much less present publicly on. So you guys get to learn some really groundbreaking information that is really hard to come by otherwise. So go watch all of it. But sort of in the typical fashion that we've been doing these last few episodes, John, I thought we'd start by answering a couple questions from listeners.
Sure.
We always have some really thought-provoking questions. So I'm going to bring up the first one. So on one of the episodes that we did recently, a listener said, what about a person who is also multi-generational SRA/MK Ultra who has chosen denial over and over when presented with proof that they are handling their wife, children, etc.?
It's kind of as far as it's constructed, the question itself, kind of a half question, but what do you do when it seems like somebody is so close yet so far? They move forward, then they move back. They have a sense, if I'm getting the question, right? And if the person that submitted the question, if they want to submit it again, as well as if we have forgotten a question, if somebody wants to resubmit a question, then we're happy to deal with that.
Absolutely. Yes, it looks like she's essentially saying, what if there's somebody, say, in a cult system that was presented with proof that they are a handler or involved, and they're choosing denial?
There you go. The brief answer is if they're choosing denial, then they're choosing to be selfish. Because if you're a handler, what are you doing? You're exploiting somebody. You're manipulating them for your benefit. Now, it may be, and this will help give me a chance to qualify a previous question that I responded to as far as what about multi-generational issues? It's really important ultimately that we look at truth, because only the truth is going to set us free. And the truth, when it comes to interactions with people, it always boils down to, in my estimation, the issue of knapsacks. We've talked about that before. Knapsacks and boulders. We talked, right? That whether somebody just has grown up in a challenging home, dysfunctional home, narcissistic home, sociopath, psychopathic, or MK Ultra, SRA. The good news is that the principles are still the same that will help that'll help set somebody free. The journey is longer, the greater degree of pain, but the principles, and that's the good news, baby steps, or one step, put one foot in front of the other. So whether regular kind of counseling or counseling those that have been sadistically abused, the principles are still the same that will set you free. And the principle ultimately is this: knowing, being able to identify the truth, what happened, and then moving towards accepting only one knapsack, as we talked about, meaning owning your stuff, no more and no less. That's the goal. So whether you came out of an alcoholic home or a sadistic home, to the extent that I can't figure out who was responsible for what is the extent to which I will be shame based, because shame is owning false guilt. And you can't do anything about that because you didn't do it. It wasn't yours. So you have accepted the responsibility of someone else. That's a knapsack. So you can try to get that off of you in this sense. You can try to work that off, be good enough, but it'll never be enough because it wasn't yours. So the only way to become free from shame is to understand it as false guilt. It belongs to somebody else. And so you have to give that to somebody else. So whether multi-generational. So in answer to the question, if you're dealing with somebody who is in denial, you can't force someone to come out of denial. They're in denial for a reason. But there's one thing to be in denial while you yourself are experiencing harm. That'll look like, well, I know what they're doing to me, but after all, it's not that bad, even though it's bad and you're experiencing the negative impact of that. So that's minimizing abuse towards yourself. That's bad, but at least you're not hurting somebody else. Still bad because you're hurting yourself. You're allowing yourself to be hurt. You're violating Matthew chapter 7, by the way. Jesus said, do not take what is special, give it to dogs. Do not cast your pearls before swine. Talks about fools in the book of Proverbs. And you'll never see that we're supposed to tolerate fools. We're supposed to put up with fools. We're not to honor fools. Doesn't matter if they're a parent or not. We're not to have anything to do with fools. Can you identify a fool? There's categories. Can you identify a pig and a dog? I have podcasts on those. Because Jesus said, don't do it. The phrase, thou shalt not, should ring a bell. The same voice that gave 10 commandments out of a bush. Actually, probably by that time, it wasn't out of the burning bush. Moses went up in the mountain. But the same voice that, the same person that wrote with his finger the 10 commandments, that said, thou shalt or thou shalt not, that same voice said, thou shalt not give what is special to dogs, and thou shalt not cast your pearls before swine. It's really important. Why? Because we're not spiritual if we do that. It's the opposite. And then Jesus went on to say what would happen. So here's the natural and logical consequences. If I can't discern between a pig, a dog, and a fool, a narcissist, a sociopath, psychopath, whoever, and that might be somebody who is multi-generational, because you're not responsible for what you're given, knapsacks. You're not responsible for what you're given, but you're responsible for what you do with it. So therefore, the phrase, and this would fit to this multi-generational person who's now a handler, which is another way of saying a user, a manipulator, an exploiter. I don't care how much you went through. Never give yourself allowance or excuse yourself away to become equally as hurtful. Where is that coming from? I mean, how do we get off excusing ourselves with that? So it's really important, especially in multi-generational families. As a matter of fact, I'll give you a different example of multi-generational. Marie Bowen in Bowenian Extended Family Systems Therapy. It's different than internal family system, right? I highly recommend Bowen. It was my favorite theorist because of how he looked at things. And he looked at multi-generation. He added some words: multi-generational transmission system. And that sounds strange. It sounds like a vehicle, or it sounds like auto mechanics. Okay. He didn't deal with anything with MK Ultra or SRA. He just noticed that if you look at somebody that's having difficulties and you pan the camera back, so to speak, in their life, and you start to put them in context, such as a family tree. So you look at the person, you look at your client, and then you ask them, as far as a regular family tree, who's your mother? Who's your father? Do you have any siblings? So you go back one generation. Then you go back another generation. So you go 3 generations. And his premise is this: unless somebody decides that the buck's going to stop here and that they're going to start improving, they will end up at a lower level of what he called emotional differentiation. Call that enmeshment, or maybe we call that trauma bonding. The goal is to become a complete self, to have a complete sense of self. When we're dealing with parts, how that would be viewed is everybody working together on the same page. So I'm not running cross purposes and I'm not reactive. And so his term, he would say that if somebody is mature, they will be able to be fully emotionally present in the moment. Wherever they are, they are. That's not trauma, right? Trauma will cause me to still, on some level, feel like it's still happening. So as I work through my trauma, I'll be able to be fully emotionally present, not just 10% present. But then he used the term emotional reactivity, that I will see a decreasing frequency of emotional reactivity. That definition is one extreme or the other. Certainly, the sound of the word is very true. If somebody's emotionally reactive, we think, man, they're escalating. Buttons or triggers, you watch. And that'll be another indicator. To the extent that I am emotionally mature, say emotionally healed, I will have fewer and fewer buttons and triggers. There's a really good barometer for someone. And there's no excuse to have buttons and triggers. Because to the extent that I excuse myself away, I'm making allowance for my emotional reactivity, and somebody's going to pay for that. I'm cutting myself slack to do what? To verbally vomit, to react, to do something, to be hurtful. I'm carving out an exception clause. But God doesn't allow exception clauses. His grace is there for me, but the last time I checked, none of us are given an exemption from having the fruits of the Spirit. Or let's say 1 Corinthians 13, love chapter. It doesn't say have these qualities in you unless you were the victim of severe sexual abuse or SRA or MK Ultra. Then the best you can do will cut you some slack, and you can be reactive and sometimes mean and nasty to people around you. They just have to deal with it because after all, look at what you went. It doesn't say any of that. It says God's grace will be sufficient. He will work and walk with me. But the criteria is still the same, that I have to treat people with respect. Doesn't matter what I've gone through. People really need to, because there's the criteria for each of us. It doesn't matter what I'm going through. What matters is this: I do what is right, just, and fair. Proverbs chapter 1, verse 3, 2, verse 9. There's no exception for that. It's a high calling. We are called to treat one another properly. So I don't care if I come out of a lineage of alcoholics, drug addicts, narcissists, lineage of anything. The question is this: what am I going to do with it? And if I cut myself slack because of what happened to me, so that I now can be selfish, now I'm going to affect the next generation. I'm going to affect the person that's married to me. There's no excuse for that. So the criteria is very high, but it's reasonable. If we pray for wisdom, Proverbs chapter 1 and chapter 2, it says, we will know what is right, just, and fair. So the book of Proverbs was written 3,000 years ago. So that probably predates a lot of multi-generational family lines, the bloodlines. I don't think anybody's going to trace bloodline beyond 3,000 years. It says, if we pray for wisdom, we'll know what is right, just, and fair. So therefore, if somebody's come out of a multi-generational home, and I left it blank, multi-generational, Murray Bowen would say multi-generational transmission system, meaning it's being transmitted from one generation to the next. So yes, the bloodlines, the SRA, MK Ultra stuff, but SRA, it's very significant, but it's not so unique that healing principles can't be brought to bear. That's the good news as well. So somebody may just have a journey of 100 miles. Somebody may have a journey of 1,000 miles. But the principles in play to be healed are the same, so that if somebody comes out of a multi-generational system, so whether dysfunctional, whether parent and grandparent and great-grandparent gaslit all the kids along the way, that's multi-generational. Whether narcissism, whether alcoholism, if you've ever seen the characteristics of adult children of alcoholics, what are we talking about? Multi-generational system. Is anybody given a pass as far as what are they going to choose to do? And if our minds suddenly go to, well, I know what he's like, but after all, look at it, the kind of dad he had, or look at what happened to him. How does he know? Okay. Are you going to excuse away emotional irresponsibility? Taking knapsacks, dumping on somebody? We're not responsible for what we're given. We're responsible for what we do with them. The buck stops here. If the person has a conscience, then they know the difference between right and wrong. If I knew what it felt like, why would I want to do that to somebody else? So as far as if I am trying to help somebody who comes out of a multi-generational transmission system, it's being transmitted from great-grandparents to grandparents, how do I help them? I reflect reality to them. Seems like there's some issues here, because the person's going to be compulsive and addictive in some fashion anyways, right? Because what are they going to do with that pain? So am I able to speak the truth in love? Another verse, as iron sharpens iron. That means if it's become something that's more than just inadvertent, it's becoming habitual and then part of their character. We kind of have to chisel off some rough edges. How do we do that? Boundaries, we have to confront. Confront doesn't mean knock down, drag out, by the way. It just means to place in front of. A dysfunctional family, a dysfunctional relationship is one that is tension reducing, but not tension resolving. So that means whatever it is, we never get to the bottom of it. So we bring the tension down, but then it gets swept under the carpet. And it becomes a landmine that everybody tippy-toes around like on eggshells. And now it's the elephant in the middle of the room that comes out of Alcoholics Anonymous. So whether a bloodline was satanic elements or alcoholic family, the question is, at what point in time is somebody going to take responsibility for how they're treating other people? So when I hear the term handler, what comes to mind is this: somebody is handling somebody. What does that mean? Somebody's manipulating, somebody's exploiting somebody for their benefit. Even if I'm reducing my own tension, at somebody else's expense. So if somebody is a handler, what's the difference then between a handler and a manipulator? Just by degree, however you want to define that. What's a handler? You can have different definitions, but it's I'm handling. Now, whether actually, typically it's not hands-on, but it means I'm controlling, I'm directing someone. It's almost like invisibly I'm putting my hands on their shoulders. Or the actual idea of a handler has to do, I mean, the real construct of it has to do with like a pimp. That I'm holding somebody hostage. I'm handling them. I can move them wherever I want, like a chess piece. Okay. So whether in the extreme, or let's say I'm trafficking. Oh, very similar, right? Taking a kid, I'm handling them. I'm handing them off. Handler actually also has, um, when you're dealing with like livestock, that's really where that term comes from. A handler, like you handle cattle as you're branding them. So somebody who's a handler is like a cattle drive. I'm directing things. I'm a shot caller. I'm not just overseeing or supervising. I'm handling. So if someone in that, for instance, the question, what do I do about my somebody who's a handler in my life? Okay, we got real issues then, because that means somebody is still manipulating other people. The phrase hurt people, hurt people. I'm willing to let that go like 2 instances. Beyond that, it's not hurt people, but selfish people hurt people. Well, but what's he supposed to do? He's supposed to, right? So at some point in time, I have to care enough about somebody else to where I'll say, even if it kills me, I'm not going to pass this along to my kid in a good, healthy way. And this will be important for people to kind of hear what I'm saying versus what I'm not. I have to be willing to sacrifice myself. Now, let me define that. In the most extreme, I have to be willing to be chivalrous and take a bullet for somebody else. But if what I'm doing in full knowledge is in order to decrease my anxiety or my tension, that I am doing something to somebody else, then I'm allowing somebody else to take the pain. That's not love. Love protects. So there comes a point in time where I have to put the brakes on and say, you know what, the buck stops here. I'm not going to pass it along. Even if they kill me, literally or figuratively, let them kill me. But if I handle somebody, why am I doing that? Well, I don't want to take the pain. I need to stand up and take the pain. I need to face those that are pressuring me and say, kill me. I'm not going to do that to my kid. That's what a parent does. Love protects. So to those, to that question, then what do you do? Number one, don't rescue anymore. Right? If you've said it once or said it twice, if you believe you've dispensed truth to them, then you need to have boundaries. Now the question is, if you still consider him to be a handler, why are you around that person? Do not be around a handler. I don't care who it is or how we define handling. Who appointed that person over your life? You're to have one God. You're to serve one master. Better go it alone than have that person. So if I have somebody in my life, I'm thinking about every dysfunctional family. There's always a black hole person in the family that's controlling the family, either overtly or covertly. And so the question is, at what point in time is somebody in that family going to say, you know what? Even if I have to go it alone, you go pound sand. I'm not dealing with you. You go take your selfishness and go. So ultimately, you can't control another person. But even by virtue of that question, what do you do if somebody you figure out they came through a family line and now they're a handler? I would say 2 things. One, you need to have a conversation with that person, because why is he or she still a handler? And who are they handling? Probably her or him. So why do you have somebody that's controlling you in your life? So that kind of twofold. One, speak the truth in love and set boundaries, and don't allow that person to control you. Now, let me address, because I didn't answer it properly, a question or two before in another program, multi-generational, and it fits right in here. What I said was true, was very forthright. It may have been a little too forthright in the sense that what happens if you have somebody who has been working on their stuff, but then out of the blue, gets triggered by some of the more sophisticated type of cult techniques. And before you know it, they've gone through, meaning the trigger happened, and now the perps, though they're dealing with, let's say, a 25 or 30-year-old woman, they were able to bypass the 30-year-old woman's mature self, and all of a sudden they've got the 5-year-old. So what you would see in that case is all of a sudden a change comes over the adult, the 30-year-old, and suddenly they go off and they get in a vehicle and they fly to Paris. And then an actual ritual happens and a sacrifice happens. And then they come back, and then they're placed right back where they were. So whether it happened on a cruise, whether it happened, a certain point in time. So you have an adult that ended up even going so far as to committing murder. A knife was placed in their hand, and they did something with that knife. Those are some of the most difficult of all the issues. My response is, so to what extent do they bear responsibility? On the one hand, they bear responsibility. We got to be upfront. Right? Beyond the age of maybe 15 or 14. Question is, let's say the 30-year-old or anybody above the age of 15, just as the knife is being plunged in by the victim into another victim, and the police come in. So this has happened in some respects, depending. Maybe not in an occult setting, but they connected dots. I guess it could be true even with school shooters. A little bit different, though. As a matter of fact, kind of different. So the police come in, and they now see anywhere between a 15-year-old and a 25 or 30-year-old now actually has plunged a knife into a child on an altar. Okay. What are the police to do? I'll tell you what the police have to do. They have to arrest the person that has the knife. In the criminal justice system, I worked on psych staff for 11 years. Let that sink in. I worked with all sorts. Okay. Even if somebody is unduly influenced, they're going to have to do some time. It's reality. Why? It was your hand. Now, what I would say is this. Now, should they get as much time as somebody with full awareness? Full, no, but they're going to have to do time. Why? I'll just make a statement. Let this kind of sink in. If you had done the work then that you're doing now, what's the likelihood that you would have plunged the knife in? It would have been less. Why? Because you're breaking those bonds, as it were. You're breaking those ties. You're breaking the power they have over you. So if you had done if the manipulated person, even historically, think of Patty Hearst, if anybody's familiar with that, the Hearst Castle out in California. I'm from California. Patty Hearst was the daughter of a newspaper mogul, so to speak, and very wealthy. I think it's the Symbionese Liberation Army. I think that's who captured her, but she was involved in a bank robbery. That cult had a lot of power over her. There may be other things, but anyways, Patty Hearst was sent to prison. And the question is, should she have gone to prison? And the answer is yes, she was involved in a bank robbery. Now, how much time? But was she guilty? Yes. So we have to place responsibility where it belongs, ideally no more, no less, but that raises the stakes for each person listening to this program. If you think there's the possibility that somebody could trigger a very young part of you to do something, then you'd better take this seriously and really fast. That is what you're responsible for. Because that little part that could pick up a knife or be handed a knife is only willing to take the knife to the extent that, what they're doing makes sense to them. So you have to help it not make sense. And so, to what extent are you dedicated in getting through to her so that you don't end up in Paris plunging another knife into somebody? So, in a supportive way, I want survivors to hear this. And anybody listening to this is, all right, this is redundant, but I simply say this: take it seriously. And whether SRA, MK Ultra, or even just run of the mill whacked out family, how about somebody that keeps going back home for Christmas? But at Christmas time or after that, they're eating themselves into a stupor. They're drinking themselves into a stupor. They do their self-injurious behavior afterward. And the question is, why do you keep going back? Because next Christmas coming around. So the work that needs to be done needs to be done. And so for the majority that are hanging in there with these programs, it's a sign that they really want the buck to stop now. So if you think, or you've noticed in the past, so as far as to what extent are they guilty? Okay, if they did it, they're guilty. Now, to what extent were they responsible? Or if somebody has a gun to your head, then you're not responsible. But at some point, so I don't fault anybody. So if an adult did it, and if they were found out, they'd still have to go to prison. Ideally, not for very long. So again, make sure that you're free and clear of these people, lest they make you take the fall. But if a part of you was triggered prematurely prior to your healing, I have a lot of empathy. So maybe that's the balance. The person's responsible, but I have a ton of empathy for them. So a very difficult subject, but the reality is you don't have any time to lose. If these people really, the more you were sucked into that, or had to, better put, the more you had to participate. Okay, that's probably very accurate. The more you had to participate as a kid, you've got to work hard. And I'm not saying people haven't worked hard, but you need to work very purposely and methodically through what we're looking at now. I was going to try to give the abbreviated version. It's about looking at, kind of go through this with the chart, right? And begin to work at getting in touch with yourself so that you can go through the healing steps so that you aren't triggered anymore, so that they don't have power over you. Take your own power back.
Great answer. And I agree with you. It is hard to give people that you could help information that you think will help them, and they just push it away and deny it, but it's like you said, that's also a knapsack. If we keep perpetuating and saying, oh well, I can fix you today just because it wasn't yesterday, like we sometimes have to hand that back and say, you'll change whenever you're ready. I gave you the information, I can wipe my hands clean, and I'm going to go live my life. You're welcome to come with me whenever you're ready, and if you're going to keep handling people and you're involved in this, like I can't be involved with you. So
Correct.
that was a very good answer, John. I appreciate talking on behalf of that, because that can be a really hard thing, separating from those things, if that's all that you know. So I appreciate your insight on bringing some logic into that. It can be very emotional for people to want to break those ties, but logically speaking, like you said, it's abuse one way or another to, to ourselves and, the people around us, to keep affiliating with abusers, knowing that they're still hurting people, knowing that they're hurting us, and anything else. So thank you so much for shining a light on that. And before we get to the presentation, because I know, this all feeds into everything that you're saying in these Q&As, a lot of these dots connect whenever you look at the big picture too and see what you're presenting. But I had another really good question that I wanted to ask you regarding physical issues, which I think is an important topic. So somebody said, sometimes I really wonder if my physical issues are related to stuff not remembered. So I wanted you to maybe to talk about that a little bit, because I think that can get very confusing for people if they have something wrong with their body, but not a memory attached to it, how do we know what's what? And, I think you could probably speak on this a little bit from clients that you've had that I'm sure have dealt with some of these abreaction things.
There we go. The brief answer is absolutely yes, that the body can remember trauma. If something needs to come up, it will. And usually, as a matter of fact, what is typical is for those that have gone through very sadistic kind of abuse, I have found that the pain will come up first in ways that will make sense once the memory comes out. So think about how many different pains somebody could have. It's, as a matter of fact, that's very, very common now that I think about it. So you can have a comprehensive way the body is dealing with trauma in and of itself. Fibromyalgia is very common among survivors. The entire system is being impacted. The nerves are raw. That's one way to hear it. So you can have generalized things. Think about what a panic attack is. So you can have a constant heavy state of a flow of adrenaline all the time. So that's high blood pressure. So, that's those are generalized things. But if you went through something, I was even working with a client last night, and as we're talking, severe pain in his groin and in his rear end, in his anus. So much so it's doubling him over. Well, what do you think happened? He has no memories yet. He has enough pieces of information, such as when he was very young, he remembers seeing extreme sadomasochistic pornography. But because he's lived in this whole thing, so, it's like playing football. It's one thing you're trying to slug it out, you're trying to move down the field. But to be able to have somebody like a coach in the press box up there looking down, see the whole field, and for survivors, because they've been slugging it out for all these years, trying to make progress, dealing with the pain, they can lose perspective. And so a lot of survivors haven't had a chance to take a step back and figure out what is normal in terms of developmental aspects of kids. And one thing is true, this will hopefully come as important information to some survivors. If you have a kid, so you yourself or you know of anybody, if a child has sexualized thoughts prior to puberty, something was introduced to them. Bottom line. Why? Because until puberty, you won't have a sexualized thought if a kid's left alone. Just be a kid. The younger a kid who has sexualized thoughts, the greater the certainty that somebody introduced that to that kid. So if you're talking a 10-year-old, okay, but a lot of 10-year-olds now are finding porn on the internet. Okay, that's enough. How about an 8-year-old? How about a 6-year-old? How about a 4-year-old? It gets to a point where you say, wait, that's younger than first grade. No way a kid would have thoughts about BDSM. But if all you've lived with is yourself, sometimes you lose perspective. And so somebody can end up blaming themselves, thinking, oh my gosh, I've always almost been perverted at age 4. I remember having thoughts of BDSM. So then it would take somebody from the outside, like in this case, me being able to kind of reflect back saying, now let's think about this. So that's something that this client is certain of, that at that young of an age, he remembers having those thoughts and even seeing images. So for me, I was able to simply say, now let's think about age 4. What grade in school are we on? It's kindergarten. Okay, so if we were to look at a kindergartner, if a kindergartner has thoughts of BDSM, Do we really think that kindergartner just manufactured those? So those are some pieces that are fact-based. So then tied with some of the things that all of a sudden coming up. And so without exception, the clients that have gone through really sadistic stuff, SRA stuff, it's all in a continuum. The body will remember it. Body keeps the score. So up will come, it's called abreactivity. Up will come things, including marks on the body. Yeah, I've seen water blisters and boils appear on the skin spontaneously that would precede a memory that a part would have, and it matches perfectly. Working with a gal, this was a number of years ago, who the husband called me. This was on Mother's Day. And he said, John, I don't know what's going on. Would you mind talking with Jane? And so the little 6-year-old came out, little Tina. And Tina, because it was Mother's Day, she was having a memory of what happened on a Mother's Day. And in that particular case, the memory was of little Tina, about the age of 8 that time, or 6, somewhere in there. They had a crystal chandelier in their front room, and Tina was made to take a dust cloth and every single little crystal she had to dust. Mother was drinking vodka on the couch with a BB gun. And if Tina would miss something, Mom would shoot this BB gun at this kid. Well, the kid couldn't take it anymore. So Mom grabs the kid off the stepping stool or the ladder, took a section of garden hose, started flailing this kid's bare back. Well, when the husband had called me, he said, John, I don't know what's going on. He says, Jane has all these red marks all over her back. We've been putting ice on them. That's what prompted the call. I said, well, maybe something's coming up. So Tina, gets on the phone. Doesn't that make sense? That after, it comes out, I then had her husband get back on the phone. And I said, what's happening with the marks? He says, oh, they're going away. So this is what she told me. He says, oh my gosh, that's exactly what it looks like. So that's oftentimes that will happen. So there's a lot of things, now kind of a different thing, but to show you the power of being able to compartmentalize. I've worked with clients who, depending upon the part, they will have different strengths of eyeglasses or not needing them at all. So the eyesight changes. So it's quite something. So if you have someone who is experiencing pain, I always recommend, there's sort of a checklist. If you're experiencing pain, I recommend going to the doctor and finding out. So you want to rule stuff out. We don't want to jump to anything because it could be that somebody has an actual illness or something going on. So let's take care of the physical first. Let's find out what's going on. It could be that, there's so many physical things that, right? So take care of the physical things first. Rule all those things out. Focus on that first. But if you've exhausted that list, and if you're starting to have dreams, if you're starting to kind of get flashbacks of things, oftentimes the sensation will precede a memory, but it'll start to make sense. So I have one client who, again, she has severe pain in her feet. Her feet go numb, ankles hurt, wrists hurt, hands go numb. So she always thought it was carpal tunnel. Shoulders, hips. A part of her, though, disclosed as a child by a group of perps at a daycare overnight, because she was placed, it was 24/7 daycare. They would tie her up on a board, a plank, a large one, piece of plywood, and had restraints wrist restraints, tied, and would put restraints, one on each wrist and one on each ankle, and then gang rape her. Well, think about a child, age 4. What's a child going to do? If you're being gang raped, you're pulling. And so historically, chiropractors and others have told her that she has the worst wrists they've ever seen. So there is verifiable information. Her ankles, if you're pulling real hard, where else is your body going to hurt? Shoulders. Might there be pelvic pain? But that the present day parts that are still defended, they have no recollection. So if I hadn't heard that from some of the young parts and seen drawings that appeared, I wouldn't know. But because I know what a part of her doesn't know, other parts know, I now know that it's cyclical, depending upon the time of year, depending upon the satanic calendar, that when her wrists are going numb, I mean, it's like clockwork. So whether pain in certain parts of the body, or in that case, where there's also either there's no indication or there's something, I don't know how I sustained this injury, but it tends to flare up. You always want to get it checked out medically first. But if nobody can give you a definitive reason as to why, then there may be a connection that something is coming up. So oftentimes the pain will precede it.
Great answer. There's definitely been examples on my podcast too, where a survivor has been able to connect that way later after they got their memories and looking in hindsight and saying, oh, I realized that after I got this memory back, this ailment stopped, or this rash stopped appearing, or this pain stopped hurting, So I think the trouble with that is that everybody experiences pain to some degree, and understanding, like you said, what's physical, what's emotional, and it's very hard to do that without a memory. But so many people just rule that out and don't bring it into the equation at all because they don't have a memory. And so it always, I think about all the time how many people with some type of chronic pain, or even an acute pain that just happens to come, or lingers or comes and goes, or an autoimmune disease. Like, how many things are getting misdiagnosed simply for physical, and the emotional part never gets, taken into account. So people are just medicating and curing the symptoms, and, the question of what's the root of this never gets asked, So this is really important. It was a really good question, because that can be really difficult. But, like you said, it's when you get your memories back, things can make sense. It might not make sense in the moment. And maybe it's not related to something in the past, but I think that should always be on the table, because like you said, the body does remember, and right down to the cellular level, like our bodies are so intelligent and they know so much that we don't consciously. And they do work together in tandem, despite, what Western medicine does a lot of times, which is separate and compartmentalize how things work. You just learn about the brain in psychology. If you're, going to exercise science, you sort of learn about like the physical body, and so combining the brain and body, it's something I think that gets considered to be like alternative medicine, when it's like, hey, this should be like our first go-to, that we should look at the body as a whole, emotions and physical body, and see how they work together, and what we can figure out on healing, looking at both those things. So I really appreciate you answering that, because I'm sure that person that asked wasn't the only one that is experiencing that. And I think it's always a good thing just to keep in the back of somebody's mind when whether they're a severe trauma survivor or somebody who was in a car accident, and had a concussion or had whiplash or something. Like, you never know how later on in a simple event, and not that that's simple, but a one-time event versus ritualistic abuse, that's continuous and consistent. You never know how everything that we go through in life could possibly show up if it's not all the way healed, and how that energy is trying to push out of us. So I appreciate you answering that. And I know that you have a presentation that you want to get to too. So I'll let you sort of go into whatever you want, if you had any more to add to that, or if you want to jump into the presentation part.
One thought that just did come to mind, and so a word to therapists, we need to make sure, especially if we're dyed-in-the-wool therapists, meaning we we think in terms of emotions, we really need to be mindful that something could just be strictly physical. And so it's really important to encourage clients to get a good physical if something's coming up so we can rule it out. Just listen to a presentation on the frontal orbital lobe, or the section of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, but it's called the frontal orbital section. And if there is damage to that, there can be, it can sort of mask psychological issues, especially in terms of impulsivity and decision making. So that was a good reminder to me, because I might think, parts coming out, where it may be there was damage, let's say through a concussion, or the extreme case, I don't want anybody to worry, but, or a tumor or something. So if there's sudden rapid changes, by the way, a good physical, get all the physical things ruled out. But if the doctor tells you, you know what, we've run all these tests, sorry to tell you, we can't find anything. Okay. Then let's look for another possible explanation. Okay, so what you don't need, so this is for the clients, what you don't need is somebody suggesting, like, you don't want me to implant. I'm very cautious about that. If something is true, it'll come to the surface. That's why even guys that I really respect, like Dr. Colin Ross, who's a pioneer in the field, he uses hypnosis. I'm not saying he's bad. I would never, ever use hypnosis on anybody. Why? Because I don't want anything prematurely coming up, because you'll be in an endless loop. And actually, that's a perfect segue into talking about this. Plus, one other piece about physical pain, headaches. Okay. And that's, again, I just referenced that. If you have headaches, you want to assess things. You want to find out, go to the doctor and have tests run if need be. But the one thing that'll happen, and we'll talk about this now, is it's very common that as parts start to come up or have been coming up, oftentimes you will have certain parts that will, as they are communicating, shall we say, as they are active, a person will feel them consistently in certain parts of their head, their cranium, and it will be painful. And parts have a way of getting somebody's attention. And so if you notice when switching starts to take place, or when dissociation starts to take place, by the way, I recommend strongly that people record their sessions. I don't know if I mentioned that before. If you take your phone, ask your therapist if you can record the session, that's such a gold mine for you, because then what you'll see, especially for the primary part, is you will see the switching take place. You will see a part interrupt another part. You'll get to hear then everything that happened in the session. If you work with a therapist remotely, which is pretty much what I do now, just like you and I, Emma, are meeting over on this platform. If a therapist is using a non-HIPAA certified platform, well, they should be using HIPAA certified, but let's say the platform they're using doesn't allow for sharing the screen recording, then as long as the client, it's always the client's decision, as long as the client is okay with it, and you fully disclose that, okay, it may not be HIPAA compliant. So somebody may, I never really worry about it too much, but how much security is there? But if the client says, no, you know what, I'm okay with that, then they can choose the platform. It is their decision, okay, as long as there's been full disclosure. So whether Zoom, whether there's a lot of different platforms, so to be able to let them be the one to record it, I never record it on my end. So they then retain the copy of it, and they can go back and watch. And as they're watching it, I always recommend they keep their journal in hand. Maybe I referenced this before. That's really important, because if there's a lot of switching, then the primary part that started in the session may only retain 5% of what transpired in the session. Yet it'll be that primary part that will be the one to say, you know what, I don't think I switch at all. I don't think any of this is true. So now they can go back and they themselves can watch their own session. And what they'll probably find is when they sit down and they're going to begin to journal about, or they're going to take notes, they're going to give observations. What they're going to find, especially if it's been more profound kind of abuse, and typically if there's a lot of switching going on, it's because of profound abuse. They will start to watch it, but then they'll dissociate as they're watching it. And they'll come to as the session's over again. So that can be very frustrating for them. And my recommendation is that's okay. Just note the time and pick up where you left off. So a part of them also is pulling them away because a part of them doesn't want to hear, doesn't want them to hear. But that's where, for instance, if you're dedicated enough to your own healing, you're going to take, so using that as an example, say you've taped a session, you're not going to try to watch it and put it aside if it's not successful. You're going to say, no matter what happens or how long, I'm going to watch the session. And then before you know it, an hour passed by and you look at the counter and you, well, the last thing I remembered, we're just 3 minutes in. Or next time you got 5 minutes in. Okay. So guess what your homework assignment is going to be consistently then? Get through the entire thing. Then you're going to go back, by the way, and you're going to read your notes. So put a timestamp, as it were, kind of write the time, look at the counter, and then read through your notes. And if you don't remember that, go back and watch it. What you're doing then is you're forcing yourself to be in the here and now because there's a reason why you're not remembering because you were pulled in. You will continue to be pulled in until you really want to know. Once you really want to know, the parts will let you stay. So that's why it's also important to work as a team. So any questions on that as we transition to the chart?
No, thank you for that. That was a great explanation.
Okay, so what did I just do? Oh, I got to bring my chart back up. Where did it go?
Where did the chart go?
Where did the chart go? Oh, it's right here. Okay, so now I can, okay, host disabled. Oh,
All right,
sorry. That's okay. Let's see if we got it. There we go. You're so good. Okay, so picking up where we left off. And again, this is going to sort of be free flowing so people know it's not scripted. You know, it's good. It's good. It's a good opportunity for me to be able to let my thoughts coalesce. Okay, we are looking at and have been looking at, so I encourage people to go back to the past few episodes because we're looking at what amounts to, now I'm going to, okay, there we go. Really what amounts to the overall internal system. I'm going to leave a little white there so I can grab it. So let me decrease this view right there, okay? What I would say about this chart is this is applicable. This really describes the worst case scenario. Okay, so regardless of what you've been through, if you've been through, the more you've been through, the more this is going to apply. So the most extreme SRA or MK Ultra, this is what you're dealing with. Anything less than this, they'll deal with a variation of it. So the reason why in creating a chart like this, whether for therapists, so hopefully this is helpful for a therapist to know that, okay, what's the goal? Ultimately, to get to know all these different parts and to help the primary person get to know their parts and to help the parts get to know the parts and then to be able to proceed down to, and you see on the bottom, we'll do that. There you go. See the core person? That's the part of them that became wounded early on. And you want to be able to help that core part begin to heal. Now, there's different perspectives. What helped them mature in terms of age and stage? You know, that's a good question. What about the concept, the child within? So I think there's a part of us that was never designed to grow, to stay very childlike. It's different than childish, by the way. Okay. So what you have in front of you is really what amounts to layers of self. Okay. And the middle layer, the red layer, is the part that keeps that which is below and that which is above, keeps them separate. So those are the hardest working parts. So we've got to give them a lot of credit. And eventually I will introduce you to those. Okay. IFS, again, I strongly recommend internal family systems. It's one way of conceptualizing what takes place. And they will speak in terms of, so my little cursor is circling here. They talk in terms of the managers. That's the everyday part of me or parts that help keep me functional. So they are helping to manage my life. You see the firefighters down here. Those are the ones that keep the present and the past, the pain of the parts that keep the memories, keeping them separate so that things don't get disrupted in the present. And then the IFS will call these exiles. These are the very young wounded parts. So look at a glance. You have a chart that shows here the different gradations of blue. Those are going to be your everyday life. Then as you begin to do the work necessary, you're going to encounter, and this is really the greatest struggle in here, because the strongest parts of you are in the red. Now, that's not to say that the wounded parts are not, but these are the parts that are trying to keep the dam from bursting. Now, I don't necessarily believe the dam's going to burst, but that's what it will feel like. Okay, so we're heading on a journey. It's like drilling for oil. We're going to begin the process of moving downward. But while that happens, as a therapist, for instance, so my comments to other therapists, my encouragement is, as you're getting to know your client, what'll happen is, as the extent to which the trust is being built, it almost gives an opportunity. Two things going to happen. Little shafts of hope, shafts of light will start to come down to the darkest areas, meaning those parts that have been secluded, those parts that have been cut off, have been walled off, have been celled off like a little prison cell. So shafts of light will begin to shine down there. Also, another dynamic, another way to view this is the little parts will start to sense some hope. And what they'll do is in order to ultimately help the little core part, they want the story to be told. They want people to know what's happening, because for these little parts down here in the green, they're in a time capsule, as it were. Okay, they've been sealed away. And so for them, time has stood still. I used the analogy previously that after World War II, on the island of the Philippines, it was not uncommon to find, a year, 2 years, three later on, a cave that was still manned by a Japanese soldier who came out ready to defend his territory, or the radio equipment that he had, because the last order given was don't come out of that without, unless direct orders. So he had been dutifully remaining in the dark, staying at his post for an extended period of time, long after the war had been over. So it's very similar. So the last thing these parts knew is that the war, really the perpetrators, are still there. So they have been sealed away. It's a little time capsule. They don't know that time has marched on. Okay, so, and they are parts that split off. So these are young parts as well, which means developmentally, they reason like kids. They have the feelings and emotions of kids. I'm not saying they shouldn't, meaning they have very raw and intense emotions. They haven't been suppressed, as far as they themselves don't suppress their emotions. That's probably fair to say. The reason why I'm grabbing this little green one right here, right, we called her Tina before, is there will always be a part, a very young part, In the worst case scenarios, so that is if somebody was subjected to a willful, strategic sadist, and having worked in prison with some of the worst, I have worked with men in prison with predators who have been arrested for torture or child trafficking. Now, on their jacket, so to speak, what they call jacket, on their files, will it say this guy was a satanic ritual abuser of kids? You tell me. Of course not. Nobody gets arrested for satanic ritual abuse. They get arrested for what? Um, the possession and distribution of child pornography, the manufacturing of that, child trafficking, um, multiple counts of sadistic child abuse. Okay. Now the question is, were there any other people involved? And yes. Okay, so factually, I can tell you, the worse a perpetrator gets, the more he's able to do heinous things. Look at Jeffrey Epstein. But we don't read about, although it probably wouldn't surprise me, were there any infants on his island? Don't know. But once somebody enters the realm of evil, as far as a perpetrator, what's he capable of doing? Well, unless you worked in a prison, I guess you could say, well, there's a threshold beyond which no self-respecting perpetrator they wouldn't stoop so low so as to harm it. Well, you don't know then. Meaning you don't know what perpetrators are like. Okay, so unless you've worked in a prison and read through criminal history, thousands of them, right? And it doesn't even take that. You can go online, just Google or do an internet search and put in certain keywords, right? Say ritualistic abuse or sadistic abuse, right? Also bestiality, because those are going to be paired. Because by the time a perpetrator has gotten into child pornography, and it's not plausible to think somebody into child pornography is not going to be acting upon it, inevitably you're going to find in the stash of child pornography, you're going to find bestiality. So a perp that has gotten into harming kids prior to that will torture animals, not like a wounded child, a child that's been perped on can end up hurting animals, but that's different. We're talking adults. Okay, and the very methodical and sadistic kind. Okay, so the people that get off on seeing animals hurt, you will, again, inevitably, you're going to find that within those that are harming kids. And then the question is how, to what extent? And by the way, that's why if you know of anybody into furries, you need to be very careful because that's the most deviant of all activities. I had furries themselves, individuals that are into, the mascot-like costumes that talk about how that's the most effective method of accessing kids. So you have a lot of really deviant individuals. It's just chocked full of them, especially the men, right? There are some women that are into it because it's a little social thing, but virtually every man that goes into furries is deviant. And they're looking for kids. That's why they promote, right? They want kids. They market to kids. Okay, so we're going to go back to teenagers. So what happens is when two things, when there's the hope of the possibility of finally being able to disclose, that starts to pull, as it were, Tina. We're just going to give her the name Tina, the little 6-year-old. That's almost like magnetic attraction. It's pulling Tina up because on the surface is where there's emotional oxygen. There's hope up there. She's been kind of drowning metaphorically. So finally, she's been stuffed away in a cave, a dark cave. And so there's a little shaft of light and she wants to follow to finally get up. Okay. Because the secrets are killing her. They're killing everybody. Actually, she's most concerned about the core person there. But she's also concerned about other parts that are being abused. So she wants the abuse to stop. She wants to tell big people what's happening, right? Because they feel like it's still happening. The other thing that will bring Tina up is the nature of the therapeutic relationship. So if you end up having a therapist that you trust, then by nature, then somebody who is trustworthy and somebody that believes that is, in a good way, it sounds funny, intoxicating. Okay, now let me qualify that, meaning it will pull, it's like drawing salve. That's a pretty good analogy, right? It will draw the little parts out. So the little parts will be compelled as they sense there's hope. They sense there's some daylight up there. They're going to move through there. And what they end up doing, and Frank Anderson and Dick Schwartz, right, from IFS, they'll say it's storming the gates. That's not a bad phrase. What I say, it's almost like football and finding a hole. They're making it, they're zigzagging through and they make it up. So whatever term you want to use, what it means is that there's a little one who made it past these levels of defense. So these parts that are dedicated to making sure that nobody gets past what? This level of defendedness so that nothing surfaces. And nothing surfaces to our awareness, to the survivor's awareness. Okay, so that's that internal dynamic. So as you're doing therapy, if you're the survivor, what you're probably going to start to sense is, in a way, you're going to go through a time where it's going to start to seem, and you're going to experience things that start to become chaotic. Now, let me qualify that a little bit. Okay. It's going to feel like things are getting out of control. In a way, just know that you're on the right trail then. You're on the right trail. Things are under control because they're starting to get out of control. Now, let me qualify that as well. That's different than self-injurious behavior kind of out of control, because that can become lethal. Okay. When that starts to happen, what level are you dealing with? Now you're dealing with, here's the self-harm. Okay. So that self-harm, that part is going to start self-harming for probably a couple of reasons, but that's different than our little Tina down here. Okay. So ultimately, how you prevent the self-harm may sound funny. How do I prevent that if I'm a therapist or if I'm the client themselves? The only way to decrease the intensity is ultimately through communication. So that is a top-down process. Okay. So as Tina is wanting to come to the surface, if it starts happening too soon, now how do I define that? Good question. Right. Because I want them to come to the surface, but at the same time, that's why I'm against, I got to be careful with, I'm just against hypnosis. Because if Tina, through hypnosis, is allowed to, so everybody else, all these other parts now are hypnotized, right? Suddenly relax, then now I'm able to have Tina come up. What happens if it's too soon? What happens if these parts aren't ready for it? And they're not ready for it if these parts aren't ready for it. And so I can overwhelm the system prematurely. So I'd much rather have Tina come up on her own so this is sort of the pacing. So that for those of you therapists that are listening to this, if you have a young part come up and start to disclose, on the one hand, it's a compliment to you. On the other hand, you need to be mindful that if you haven't had a chance to check in with, and Frank Anderson does a nice job, what he talks about is we need to be given permission from these. I agree. However, not at the expense of Tina. Okay. And what's also interesting is this. I'm convinced that this is very interesting. I'm thinking this through on some level, because eventually you're gonna get to meet these. Okay. And the most important one, or some of the most important ones, the one that's ultimately calling all the shots. And there's a lot of descriptor. At some point in time, we'll read all of that. Okay. But this is the one that is the ultimate gatekeeper. Another very powerful part is the self-harm part. That's these two, as a matter of fact, I'm sorry, the gatekeeper and the self-harm part usually are very closely associated. Okay, this is the self-destructive part. I think it's safe to say this, that in a strange sort of way, if they weren't ready, they won't believe they're ready and they won't even phrase it that way. But if Tina is able to bypass that, then I know two things. It's going to create disruption down there. So it increases the likelihood, by the way, of self-harm. Okay. So I need to be able to speak to that as a therapist. The reality is if Tina comes up, then it's reverberating all the way up. Oh gosh, what happened to her? Oh, that part. Okay, we'll straighten that part out. Okay. But the self-harm part is going into damage control mode because it's reverberating, because ultimately what's happening is truth is starting to get to the surface. And the truth is starting to erode the defenses. So they'll go into damage control mode. Therefore, it's important as you're working with the entire system to know that your goal isn't to go from the surface, so this is the primary person that's walking into session, isn't to all of a sudden get to the littles, or, they're called, different people call them different little ones, right? The children, the littles. Okay. That's not the initial goal. Okay. Now, if they choose to come up, and oftentimes they will come up sooner rather than later, but your goal is to start to get to know from the top down these different levels so that they can begin to trust you, because if and when the little one comes to the surface, it's going to shake things up, especially because of what's going to be disclosed. Because there is a healthy sense of denial in here. And if you're forcing those to listen to things that are too soon, now when is it ever right? But if it literally too soon, and that I think is premature, meaning it's premature in the sense of too early in therapy, because maybe they don't still trust the therapeutic process. They don't trust the relationship yet. They don't trust the therapist knows what they're doing, because it will feel like all hell's going to break loose. If there has been, and again, we use the term programming. I know I say I don't really like that. I don't have a problem with it. I just want people to understand that it's not programming like you do to a computer. Okay. It is unduly influencing. It is persuading. Okay. So the reality is, if you're a survivor, you haven't been programmed so much as part of you is really persuaded what is true. Okay, now, so if it's programmed, then all you can do is, you can't do anything about it, right? Unless you're a better deprogrammer. Okay, so it's not like sitting down at a keyboard and programming something. What it means is these different parts are 100% persuaded, not because they're stupid or dumb or naive or anything, or like they don't get it. They just know what they know, and they're not stupid. But unless they have alternative information with which to process the pros and cons, true versus false, then all they have to go with is what they know. So just because they don't agree, one comes up and it says, I don't believe that didn't happen. Okay, I'm not going to tell them. I'm not going to force them to look at it. I'm just going to present information that they themselves even know. So whether the nature of the relationship of a perpetrator, as a matter of fact, I spoke to somebody today. And she said this, well, I know my dad was really narcissistic, but he loved God and he loved his family. And I said, hold on. So those are kind of contradictory. And so a little piece of truth, right? A little drop of truth sunk in because it stopped her. And so a part of her then was able to begin to compare and contrast without me making commentary. Okay, and that's why I believe it's really important to just be very methodical about the process. Okay, so there's the whole picture right there. Okay, so as a therapist, your goal is you're going from, you're drilling for oil, we're eventually going down. Okay, if you're a client, your journey will be you're going to get to know yourself. Now, Does this mean you're going to have, if you counted these up, if you're normal, you probably counted all these up. I forget how many boxes or how many, right? How many parts. No, it's just the more severe, like this is the most severe of sadistic abuse or MK Ultra. Now, each of these can represent 5 or 10, right? Variations of that. So there can be quite a few. Okay. I just listened to a really well-known person that deals with D.I.D. and he just felt maybe 16 would be the max. That's not true. Okay. And as a matter of fact, each part will have its own style of handwriting. Okay. And it'll be very consistent. So that's why I recommend also do journaling. And if you can have two journals, then you can give one to your therapist if they're willing to do this. And so if finally one of these parts, so let's say right here, the spiritual guilty part finally journaled for the very first time. So you hand that journal to the therapist. Now the therapist has the one and only sample of, let's call her Melinda. Okay, let's say the spiritual guilty part is Melinda. So Melinda finally comes out and talks. And if you've been with us, you'll remember that it's not so much that the primary person, oh, where did my names go? You know what? As we're talking here, let me let me bring up because I think I had the one with names on it. So my apologies. We're going to bring up a second one here. As a matter of fact, I know I had one. So let me find out here. Master of system. Okay. Well, this will be helpful. So now we're going to go back to the one that we had names on. I may have to get out of this and come back in.
No
So,
problem.
Emma, any questions? Yeah, you know what? I'm probably going to have to. Oh, there. Let me go to the one with names. Okay, so the one we just did that you aired has names. So I'm going to get out of this, and just as quickly, we're going to go right back into the one with names.
Perfect.
Wait a second, I remember. Okay, so there we go. So again, you saw the entire lay of the land, so to speak. Now this is where we ended it, right? So we gave names last time to these parts. It's a lot easier. And what I mentioned last time was there's going to be subsections that within these different parts, they may or may not know the others. They may or may not get along with the others. And that's why they're sort of, they keep each other at arm's length or they're walled off. And Emma, any questions? Not that you have to. I know I can just keep talking and talking.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I'm excited to get to this next part too. This has been really neat building on this.
Okay. Okay. I think I left somewhere in mid-sentence, but that's okay. I'll eventually remember if you remember. Ask away. So, again, when you start therapy, oh, I know. So we did the guilty one. There we go. Okay, I called her Carrie, so that's where we went. So let's say Carrie, I think I called her Belinda, but we're going to go with this. Oh, there's Belinda right there. Okay, but we're going to call her Carrie. So the spiritual guilty one, the reason I named her Carrie is, let's say with sadistic abuse, SRA, that probably a perp, actually not probably, this is what they do. So think about the movie Carrie. So they're helping to create additional parts, put them under trauma. You can even do it while you show the kid the movie Carrie, and then you tell the child that they are the spawn of Satan or they're the bride of Satan now. You show that movie, you're gang raping them, and okay. So now Carrie has spiritual guilt. Let's just, we'll just say that that's part of what the issue is. She wants to be spiritual, but she believes either wrongfully or rightfully that, let's say she had to participate in sacrificial stuff. So now she has all this spiritual guilt. They may also have shown different videos of natural disasters or in LA, you have the Santa Ana winds. So if you're a little kid and somebody tells you the Santa Ana winds are blowing and they only blow when there's information that Satan needs to tell us about you, if you say the word Santa Ana, which means Saint Anna, if you say it fast enough, it can sound like Santana or Satan winds. So one of the clients I worked with, whenever the Santa Ana winds in Southern California during the winter time when all the fires happen in the mountains, because of the bowl-like effect that comes into Southern California, the dry air. So Carrie came into session one day, or it started with Mary, and before I knew it, Carrie came out, and what happens is Carrie will pull Mary in. So again, just for the dynamic of working with the parts and for a therapist, hopefully this will be helpful. I used to think that the primary presenting part used to go away. Now I think what is true, but this is still worth each person because ultimately each of you that have parts, you're the resident expert, to be honest. Okay. But I really think now the dynamic is not so much that Mary goes away, which would be this. So let's say the Santa Ana winds are blowing. Let's say Carrie, whose mother and stepfather were Satanists. I believe Anton LaVey was a part of that group, Uncle Anton. So instead of what I used to believe, it got too much. So Mary comes into session, her hair is all blown because of the Santa Ana winds. Well, what do you think has been triggered? We've got Carrie that a lot of her was triggered, but Carrie is just under the surface vibrating because why? She knows that Satan is taking information about Mary's thoughts and delivering them through the wind to, that's right, to the organization. Okay, so Mary's agitated because she's feeling or Mary is on point or anxious or feeling the jitters really of all the adrenaline. And I used to think it was Mary that before you know it, there's a switch. So the question is, did Mary go away or what happened? The reality is this, I think. It's not so much that Mary went away, but Carrie pulls Mary in. Now, Mary has gone into a little time capsule, so to speak. And so we call that dissociation. So let's say the session, by the way, this will be helpful. So let's say the session is from 3 to 4. I actually recommend 2 hours, ideally. I recommend to therapists that you're going to have to, if you are going to work with SRA survivors or MK Ultra, do not start working with them if you are dependent upon insurance and you're not going to offer any additional sessions at any sort of break or free. Do not do that. Okay. It is not sufficient. 1 hour once a week. Do not do that. Just do not work with, refer them on. Don't in a cold way, but out of care and concern. If somebody has all of this, you're never going to make progress 1 hour once a week. It ain't going to happen. Okay. So this kind of work is at least twice a week, 2 hours, but ideally twice a week, a block of 2 hours at the beginning, 3 times a week, 2 hours each. So you can see how many therapists, right? Insurance isn't going to pay. Well, then don't start to specialize then, right? Go into this for the right reason. And there's a balance, right? We all need to be paid, but it's just a very hard thing. So, okay, sorry. I digress, but that's important. Okay. So for the first number of months, you're going to almost like going to the chiropractor for the first time. You really have to double up on adjustments. Okay, Mary comes in. We've got Santa Ana winds blowing in Southern California. She comes in at 3 o'clock. And all she knows is we're going to do this. She comes in at 3 o'clock. You're seeing Mary. Okay. Let's say that's the name that she signs. That's her, and that's on her driver's license. Okay. Well, before you know it, somehow Mary changes. Okay. So the Mary that was there present, before you know it, I don't know, I should do a video so that there's like animation, but before you know it, Mary has sort of changed, but now let's pretend we've been working with Mary long enough and we can notice the change. So before you know it, Mary goes away and now there's Carrie. You'll see you'll hear voice inflection. There's going to be facial expression difference. Oftentimes when the switching has happened, you're going to see pupil dilation. The light hasn't changed in the office, but you're going to see this change. So now Carrie is out. Of course, she's still my client, right? But then there's a whole different persona. And now Carrie will suddenly shift the topic. It could be very quick. So Mary came in talking about she doesn't know why she's anxious and So we're exploring why she's anxious and when did that anxiety start? Oh, we got the colored pizza there. And then before you know, well, I don't, I started like this morning. Okay, what's going on this morning? And before you know it, all of a sudden she comes out with, so there goes Mary, right? We're exploring. All of a sudden, there's this abrupt shift, almost like mid-sentence, mid-syllable. I hate it when there's this wind, the Satan wins, or and so now we're getting we're getting somewhere. Something just connected with somebody. So Carrie now is going to we're getting closer to something. And so when Carrie says, and this really happened in session, by the way, in Southern California. So Carrie says, I hate the Satan winds. But she said it in such a way I didn't catch on at first because they're Santa Ana. So I thought, well, maybe she said it in such a fast way that she didn't enunciate clearly. She didn't say Santa Ana wins. She just said, I hate the Satan winds. And then all of a sudden, because it's unusual enough, it's like, say that again. And so now, a little more slowly, she repeated it, and I could start to make out as Carrie was describing the word Santa Ana. Guess what she said? Well, now I know it's not the temperature outside, it's not the wind, it's not, she's not agitated because it's messing up her hair. What is it? Well, now you're tapping into, here we go. I mean, you're not going to see all this, right? But as you're starting to get to know a system, you know that at some deep level, as Mary came into session, and as you started to begin to ask her, so we're beginning to focus more, we're zeroing in on the here and now and what triggered her. That's going to really, it's causing her to be mindful. If anybody's familiar with CBT, right? I'm sorry, DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, right? So by asking Mary the question, she's now getting in touch with what she's really feeling. And now, somebody who has parts, those feelings will be compartmentalized. So by me honoring, not telling her, well, there's nothing to worry about. Why are you all, right? Because now I want to know that that truth is going to come up. And so as Carrie comes out, Mary gets pulled back in, but Mary's going to, we call it dissociating. So Mary is now dissociating. Okay. So we still have my client Mary, oops, sorry, right? Mary's body, my client. If anybody walked in session, they'd still see Mary, but I have another part of Mary out. So Carrie, who is being triggered by something going on in the here and now. And you notice, what is her root issue? So how do I know that? Because eventually, as I was getting to know Carrie, I began to realize there's a theme here. The things that trigger Carrie, that bring Carrie out, had to do with spiritual guilt. So if she comes out now triggered by winds, then I can probably guess that somebody did a number on her in terms of theology, or somebody talking about God or Satan. Okay, so Carrie then is triggered by things related to spiritual topics, and she has guilt. So in that session, I was able to spend some time getting some information. And lo and behold, of course, where did she get that information? So now there's some disclosure. So in her case, since Carrie is a little bit deeper, and Carrie, now this is true with the other parts, but I'll show you what happens. Carrie goes back, and now Mary comes out. Now, let's say the session started at 3 p.m. When that switch took place, let's say it starts, that switch takes place at 3:10. Let's say my conversation with Carrie took place over 5 minutes, but let's even say 10 minutes. So it starts the conversation, that switch at 3:10. And then before you know it, there's been sufficient information disclosed or enough truth, because as I say, oh, you mean the Santa Ana wins? Well, what is Carrie going to look like, by the way? I know I launched into this example, but kind of go with this, right? Carrie all of a sudden is going to be stopped in her tracks a little bit because what I've just said is brand new to her. She's looking at my facial expressions, right? Because she knows that it's the Satan wins. So for the first time, because a part of her is literally in the here and now, she can hear something that is able to compare and contrast truth. And now a part of her, meaning Carrie, part of Mary, Carrie is able to begin to think about that new information. So some truth is starting to sink in, and the truth will do what? Will set her free. So think about a cult member. Remember, the cult leader wants to isolate everybody. The last thing they want to do, or a communist country, is allow outside input, allow somebody to listen to the voice of America. But boy, did that end up getting all screwed up, right? But the idea that we're trying to send information down into behind the iron curtain, behind the bamboo curtain. So Carrie now has been in the iron curtain or the bamboo curtain, and all of a sudden comes out and is hearing something, really hearing it for the very first time. So now Carrie's left to process, meaning as she and I talk about it, now she has a new piece of information. And as that starts to settle her down and the body down, then guess what happens? Then it's safe for Mary to come back because now there's less anxiety, which is really, again, as we talked about, adrenaline. So Mary comes back. Now, Mary, meaning that switch happened, it initially happened. Carrie comes out, pulls Mary in at 3:10. It's now 3:20. Oftentimes, what will happen is, I would say oftentimes, not every single time, but Mary would have a propensity to, and this would be very consistent with Mary. When she came back out, you would notice um, Mary would blink a couple times, kind of like if we zoned out for a moment, like, where am I? Right. So Mary would blink a couple times, and then Mary would consistently look at my watch. Now, that was a very interesting thing. It took me a while to figure out because her eyes always went to my left wrist at the time when I used to wear a watch. She never wore a watch. So that you wonder what that's about. That's interesting. Um, but when I began to see pairing of this blinking, she comes back and then she looks, I began to realize, wait a second, she's looking at my watch because as I'm working with her, my palms are face down. So the dial of my watch is where? Now, some people wear their wristwatch on the inside, right? Mine would be kind of normal up top on my forearm right there. So if I'm sitting there, if she glances at my wrist, she can see the time, how much time has moved. And so I remember once I finally figured this out, I covered my watch as the switch was reversing and she was coming back out. And I covered my watch. Her eyes glance at the watch. I know this is tangential, but this will help, right? And I covered it. So she comes back too, and she looks at the watch, and now something's different. I'm covering my watch. Because I figured out what happened, as she's looking at my wrist, I said, "What are you looking for?" So now I'm making covert overt, and she stops. She's kind of staring at me. I said, what time is it, do you think? Now she glances again. She can't see it. And I said, Mary, tell me what time you think it is. And now what's happening? I'm beginning to cause Mary to have to become a little more aware of the dissociation, that it really is happening. And so I remember as I asked Mary, what time do you think it is? And she has now the beginning of a worried look on her face in this sense that she knows she can't excuse it or explain it away ultimately to herself. So I said, Mary, you don't know if it's been 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 45 minutes, or if the session's almost done, do you? Okay, now why would I reference that? Because part of these levels are designed to not only keep things functional, but also to keep anything from getting to the surface. that would start a disruption. And part of what would start a disruption is enough pieces of information. I'm going to cover this again just for a second. So I'm going to talk to Mary, right? So Mary's come back, as it were, and I've let her know that you kind of do lose track of time, don't you? Can you explain that? Okay, so Mary, aside from her little color, her spinning pizza, um, Mary now is sort of left with herself to have to face additional fact-based information that things happen, Mary, that you can't dismiss away. But you're not crazy, Mary, crazy, right? You're not crazy. And you were disclosing some information to me. I know what that information is. Tell me what you just told me over the past 10 to 15 minutes. Now, right, just kind of in good humor, because I'd gotten to know Mary actually over the course of a number of years. I said, Mary, tell me what you told me over the past 50 minutes. She says, it hasn't been 50 minutes. I said, no, I'm just kidding. Over the past 10 minutes. She says, oh, but still, now what is she left with? This dilemma, like, I don't remember 10 minutes. Okay. And then again, little by little, it's chipping away at understandable defenses because Mary has a sense that if this is true, then that might be true. And then how far does this go? Well, over time, she's had enough indicators that there's some stuff, maybe stuff early on and not good stuff. And who wants to believe that that happened? So that one example that I just gave, there's a good example that depending upon the situation, you can have present day person that comes into a session or you go to work, but throughout the day, you might lose chunks of time. Okay, so there's our anxious Annie, but then come back. But those may be brief times. But then there might be times, and so this is picking up, I don't know what that is. Oh, but then there might be times when what we will say is you're not just triggered, but you're really triggered. Okay. When you are really triggered, what's happening now is it is, as it were, connecting with those parts. Okay. These parts are here ultimately to ensure that if these backup parts, it's funny to say backup, but if these primary parts, current primary parts, get overwhelmed, then these parts are going to step in because it has to do with pain management. It has to do with overwhelm management, right? So I kind of use the term pain loosely. If you have a lot of anxiety, it really is painful. It's not comfortable. It's not good to, meaning nobody likes to feel that. So whenever there is anything other than feeling okay, then a part of me has to try to adjust to that. If you've gone through a lot of trauma, then your ability to adjust to that, so here we are again, it's just you, but your ability to adjust has become compartmentalized. So there won't be the smooth transition within yourself where you're able to kind of access different aspects of yourself in a smooth transition. It reaches a certain threshold, let's say a scale of 1 to 10, and maybe a 4, maybe a 3, wherever that is. And all of a sudden, before you know it, you're accessing these present everyday parts. Okay. And this is enough. Life has enough challenges. But now, if you encounter something or someone who reminds you of something at a deeper level, what's going to happen is that level is now going to be brought to bear. because these parts will also be present during the day. So there can be a lot of shifting. But we could say these parts aren't designed or intended to deal with significant potential threats. Okay, maybe the frustrations and irritations and the stresses of normal life. But if you encounter something or someone, we might say, how about this? Buttons and triggers. So that's a good way to put it. So we're all walking through this together. Okay. So buttons and triggers. Now, these could be triggered a little bit. Maybe the more mild stuff. It's still fair to say, you know what? That person ticked me off. But would I say that person triggered me? So I think there's a difference. And you know what? That's how we'll go with this. So this is the more functional day-to-day stuff, because as Jesus said, in this life you'll have difficulties, going through the world. These are people that take your parking space, or just life. Okay. But there's one thing, it's one thing to have somebody take your parking space. It's another thing to have somebody look at you and really take your space and then flip you off and then get out of the vehicle and start, right? It's like, what? And it took it to the next level. So a cashier that was rude. Okay. So Dana can handle that. But a cashier that not only is rude, but says, you know what? Meet me on the parking lot. I'll show. I'm making that up. All of a sudden, now it's a different level. They took it to a different level. And so now, Dana can handle rudeness, but potential aggression. Whoa. What domain is that? Right? When somebody is, so here we're going to put everybody back where they belong, so to speak. Okay. So Mary goes to Walmart. I'm just going to make something up, and encounters a rude cashier. Okay. So Dana deals with that, pulls her in for a second. And Mary's going, no, no, no. Oh, there's certainly parts of Mary, like, hold on. The anxious one, people pleasing. I need to add another one, huh? Okay. So, but we'll say, okay, we could say this is people pleasing, helpful, right? Maybe, oh, that's not helpful. So all of a sudden, we have a rude cashier. So the longer in line, or the longer Mary's items are being scanned, beep, beep. I'm picturing her hands, the cashier's hands scanning these things. Well, there all of a sudden may be, because the cashier is being rude. Hold on, let me get back to where we are. Okay. So Mary is at Walmart, pulls in with her grocery cart to the aisle, and she doesn't do self-checkout. She's doing the having a cashier help her. And before you know it, she's sensing that this cashier is just kind of rude. She's getting vibes, and maybe Mary starts asking, like, how's your day? Fine. Or doesn't even respond. Okay. So now, because Mary has just started to feel certain things, it's triggered on the inside. So very quickly, Mary, and this is where we talked about Emma headaches. So all of a sudden, if we got a lot of movement going on, maybe Dana comes in the occipital area. Well, maybe the anxious part is the left temporal area. Maybe the dutiful one is on the right or in the frontal area. So depending upon who's starting to, it's really who's going to win out, quite frankly. So quickly, so Mary's being a little triggered by the situation. So now we've got a bunch of different thoughts. Now, do we have the detached one? There we go. Marcia just doesn't care. So Marcia's still smoking dope or taking CBT pill. Okay, moving along. But we might start to have crosstalk, as we talked about. I think I need to get my little arrow. Let's get our little arrow here. Draw. Nope, that's what we're going to insert, and we're going to insert an arrow here. Just bear with me, everybody. So we're going to, shape. That's what we're doing. Okay, there we go. So we got some shape going on. So, well, I'm going to have to increase that. So everybody bear with me. You know what? We'll do red just for the heck of it, and then we're going to increase it just so we can see all this. Here we go. Okay, there we go. So I'm not necessarily doing this red because Dana is the one that can be aggressive just for the sake of allowing us to see. So Dana is starting to poke, 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 like, don't let her talk to you like that. What are you talking about? Or come on, she's being rude. Say something, say something, say, don't be a doormat. Don't be, right? Starting to say something. And then maybe Robin's, no, do we have a spiritual one? But let's say we got a placating one. Think, oh no, she's probably having a hard time. Um, and maybe we just need to crack a joke. Maybe we just need to keep it light. All of a sudden, Dana, who has been getting down on Mary, all of a sudden says, "And you be quiet. What are you talking about?" Well, now we can have. Okay, hold on. We're gonna copy and paste this. Ready? Copy. Let's see if this will come out and paste. Hopefully, it's there. There we go. Okay, so now we can have, and this oftentimes happens. I can't see my. There we go. So everybody will be able to relate to this with parts, right? So before they come out, oftentimes what's going to start happening, you're going to have crosstalk, right? We'll move her down here. So now we have this dialogue going on. Maybe we should paint her a different color just to differentiate. There we go. Okay. So let's say, okay. So let's say Brenda, in response to Mary sees the cashier, Mary is conflicted because we see the cashier who's starting to be a little rude. And Dana's saying, well, that's what she's paid for. That's her job, So first of all, she's talking to Mary. So at first, Mary's on the receiving end of this cashier that's not being very cordial. And Mary's starting to feel anxious. Mary hasn't done anything wrong. She's starting to feel anxious. And Dana says, hey, the assertiveness training courses we've been taking, get her, so we got the poke, poke, poke. And all of a sudden, Brenda, the helpful one, starts to say, Mary, you know what? Ask her if you can help her with her job. Does she need a break? As a matter of fact, why don't you take over for her, even though you're not going to get paid, right? Maybe she's having a hard day. So why don't you just ask her? And so what is Dana doing? Dana's saying, don't let her talk to you like that. So now we have in one ear or the other, everything's being directed to Mary, but then all of a sudden, Dana might do what? You know what, Brenda? Shut up. What are you talking about? We're not putts. And then Brenda might say, you know what? We're not supposed to be like that. Okay. But oftentimes, Mary is going to feel like that conversation, oftentimes, by the way, that's taking place above her. And I think we mentioned that before last time, that Mary will hear these conversations either in one ear on the other or just above her. So we've got all this back and forth conversation going on, right? But Mary has never wanted to say anything because Mary was told only crazy people hear voices. Okay. So it's not crazy. But, if you say it to the wrong professional, the wrong mental health professional or psychiatrist, they're going to say, now you hear voices, right? Because that mental health professional or psychiatrist, if they're of the belief that hearing voices means you're crazy, then they're going to conclude, well, that's crazy. You don't hear it. You're delusional. You're manufactured, whatever. Okay. It does not mean you're crazy. Now, there's a difference, and I mentioned this before. There's a difference between, there's 5 different reasons for voices, but with this kind of voice, the crazy voice versus non-crazy voice, this is non-crazy voice. It can be crazy making, right? But this is not crazy. Why? Because these are parts of you. Now, what's the difference? If all of you were in my class, I would say, okay, so what's the difference between the crazy and the non-crazy voices? And if anybody remembered, we would do this. I'm just going to use the arrows. Okay. We'll do it like this. Okay. If Mary is hearing voices coming where? Doink, doink, right? Coming from outside in. So this is Mary's hair. Okay. Outside of her. So if voices are coming like from the Norwegian antenna being broadcast to her, if she's watching TV and CNN is giving her special messages, okay, those are the crazy voices. That's why if Mary were truly crazy, Mary would try to shield her scalp, her cranium, by a tinfoil hat so that these would bounce off. They couldn't get through. Like the mothership is sending messages. Those are the crazy ones. Okay. How also can you tell? So, one thing you ask is, are you hearing voices from the outside in or from the inside in? If it's inside in, that's not crazy. Okay. Now it may seem different, but right, you've probably lived with that forever. Okay. But that's not psychosis. From the outside in is psychosis. Now, demonic possession, other thing, we'll tackle that at some point in time. Okay. But all things being equal, here's another thing where you can tell the difference between crazy voices and dissociative voices or voices coming from parts. Okay. People that hear voices from the outside in know that they're picking up messages. Do they feel crazy? No, they feel convinced because this information is for them, so they feel. Matter of fact, I'm gonna draw something here. I'm just gonna everybody stay with me just for a second. We're gonna do this right here. Okay, so it's like this is our protective, I don't know, protective field around us. Okay, so if Mary is schizophrenic, truly psychotic. Okay, let me see if I can. Oh, I don't think I can. Right, I can't change the color just now. Okay, so if Mary is hearing voices from the outside in, then doesn't it make sense that she's going to do a protective mechanism to cause these to bounce off? Okay, hence we get the term tinfoil hat. Now, if Mary truly is crazy, will Mary have a problem telling a mental health professional or a doctor that this is going on? And this is a review, by the way, but maybe this is helpful. Helpful. Okay. She won't have a problem, or he won't, this could be anybody. Okay. So if it's from the outside in, the person that's truly going schizophrenic will want to protect their brain from the outside waves or something, the messages, the EMP or something. So they're going to have a protective mechanism, some sort, and they're going to either want help or they're at least going to want people to know about these messages and the entities or the mothership that are sending these, because in a way, they feel they've been chosen. So there's what we call that paranoid schizophrenia, because eventually also oftentimes these messages are not just persecutorial, but you had better do this or the world's going to end. You better do this or a loved one's going to die. You better follow our orders or, okay. So if you're kind of halfway normal, that may sound funny, right? You're going to either want it to stop or you're going to want to help protect somebody else. So you'll offer to make another tinfoil hat for them. Okay. So one thing you look for to differentiate between crazy voices versus, I mean, it's somebody that truly is psychotic versus somebody that isn't, is are they willing and able and free to talk about this dynamic? A crazy person, truly crazy person, will bring it up or they're going to talk about it because this person that's experiencing this doesn't believe they're crazy. Okay, so the voices from the outside in and the wanting to protect their head, right? They have a force field, a shield. Those are two indicators, and wanting to talk about it. Okay, those are two indicators that we're dealing with bona fide schizophrenia. Now, I also just heard a doctor, and he made a pretty good case that there is no real genetic predisposition, which was new news. So anyway, there can be a lot of information about that, but that's in a nutshell. Okay, that's how you differentiate the crazy voices from, now I'm going to get rid of the crazy voices, from the voices that are non-crazy, because these voices come from the inside in. Okay, it's different from the outside in. And in this case, Mary, we're going to put her up at the outside there. Mary is fearful that she's what? Now she's crazy. Now remember the other situation with the voices from the outside in. Does that, in that condition, would Mary feel she's crazy? No, remember she's going to talk to the doctor about it and urge the doctor, right, to take care, take protective steps for him and his own family. And doctor, I brought an extra tinfoil hat for you because I care about you and I want you to feel safe. Or don't watch this channel. Or okay. So again, Mary, if she's crazy, she will not fear that she's crazy. Okay, so if you're listening to this and you're watching this little rough diagram or this demonstration here, if you fear that you're crazy, you're not. If you hear voices on the inside in, you're not crazy. You have this dynamic going on. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful to somebody. So we're going to come back to Mary now as we'll advance our discussion for a little bit, and then we'll keep continuing in our series. So Mary comes into session. Mary has, a lot of the indicators that there's been sexual abuse. That would be the depression. That would be anxiety, panic attacks, eating disorders, compulsive behaviors. She's probably been also diagnosed as having personality disorders. We'd have borderline personality disorder. We'd have histrionic. We'd have dissociative. Um, uh, Sometimes, although again, a lot of doctors or clinicians don't believe in that. How about there'd be adjustment disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, almost inevitably borderline personality disorder. And by the way, where does that come from? And Frank Anderson put it beautifully that he's never seen a case of BPD, borderline personality disorder, that really isn't attributable to parts. So the best way, and it's pretty much true, the best way to view, although there is a brain structure we're going to look at in the next few weeks, some brain scans of borderline personality disorder versus parts. So you can actually have a very biophysiological brain structural issue with borderline personality disorder. Okay. But something that can look like borderline personality is parts, where you then can have a part that's very playful. So you can have quick shifting going on from playful to what? To aggressive. And so these two are switching and they're angry with each other. And then Mary may or may not remember, but the friends of Mary or people in Mary's life or her spouse or her kids, all they know is mom keeps changing up, right? Before you know it, mom's this. And then I could even put this in front. Let me bring the front here. There we go. So mom just changes up. As a matter of fact, oh, that's good, right? Let me make Dana a little larger. So before they know it, mom just keeps changing up real fast. And as fast as mom changes up, mom comes back. And so they never know which mom they're dealing with. Okay. So oftentimes, especially if there's sexual abuse or there's a lot of abuse, how do you know if that? One of the key indicators, lapse of time. So is there dissociation? Okay. Or triggers. Okay. And then, of course, the switching up. So if that's going on, then again, that would be part of the intake, right? As you're meeting Mary. Oh, we'll just leave Dana like that for a moment now. So we're meeting with Mary. Mary starts to check all the indicators she's gone through, maybe the dissociative experiences scale. You've talked to her, you kind of run through the various questions. Does she lose track of time? Does she have the different, more than one diagnoses in the past? And then start to ask, does she lose track of time? Does she find that she has items that she doesn't know, especially clothing for women, not just with women, but a lot of times women? Right? Does she run late a lot because she's changing her clothes? But gaps of time. Does she, again, we all lose items. We can't remember every single detail, but losing hours, days, and weeks, including years. So that's why also as an assignment, a homework assignment, a very helpful one is doing a timeline, beginning to walk yourself through the history of your life, the significant events. If you find that there are significant gaps of time, the question is, what's up with that? Meaning that provides you with additional information and looking at photographs. If, as you look at photographs, it's like you don't remember, then that can be an indication. The more of that, then you know something's going on. And then the therapist ideally will begin to ask for, hey, do you ever hear some and how you put it, some static on the inside. You hear some um, stuff on the inside. You kind of gingerly ask the questions, at least I do, and they say, well, what do you mean? Because now they have a sense that maybe you're getting at something. Well, do you ever there's self-talk, and then there's something a little more than self-talk, right? Because I, as a clinician, want to help that conversation go well, because the client doesn't know what I'm going to do with that. So if they can see that I'm suddenly being tentative, then it's going to be easier for them to acknowledge or admit, if in fact it happens. Okay. So if it happens, then what you're going to be doing now, I'm going to see if I can move Dana backward just a little bit. Send it backward. Hopefully she won't despair. There we go. There we go. I don't want Dana to despair. That would be like integration. I don't believe in integration now. Okay. So that'll be for another topic. So again, I'm working with Mary. We've begun to help her feel more comfortable. We've established a relationship, because ultimately what we're doing for these podcasts, and what we're doing is we're helping someone. What can you expect? What should you expect? How will therapy go for the therapist? Where are you going? You want to establish that relationship with Mary and begin to discern and help her discern. Are there times where it seems like there's other aspects of you? Okay. So then what'll happen is, and where we ended last time, is we talked about establishing ultimately a one-up, one-down relationship with each of the parts. And so I believe what we did is we ended up, these are always very fine at first. So if you've never seen how to do charts with Word document, this is how you do it. Right, so we're going to copy and paste this. So copy, and now we're just going to, we're going to paste a lot of this. So here we go. So little by little, as the therapist, you're going to help decrease Mary's anxiety by helping her know that the experiences she experiences, that's redundant, huh? I'm losing track of there we go. That the experiences she experiences, as far as the dissociation, doesn't make her crazy. It just means something probably is going on that she's not aware of. And on some level, though, she has a sense. Okay, so what we're going to do is little by little, so you kind of get the feel of where we're going with this, hopefully, which is this. Right now, Mary is, I think the lines will be there. Okay. Mary is sort of aware of, or maybe fairly aware of, but never has really either wanted to focus on it or hoped it wasn't the case. Again, remember the voices that she has heard, either directly to her or cross-talking, also associated sometimes with the pain in the scalp and the cranium. So what she has sensed is there's some stuff going on, but she hasn't really wanted to believe, for fear she's crazy, that stuff is associated with parts. So the first stage of therapy, the very first part, of course, is the therapist and Mary establishing the relationship before we're even going to talk about the issue of parts. Okay. But during that early exploratory time, we're going to begin to find out, are there parts that could then explain the gaps of time, the changeability, the degree of anxiety, depression, the buttons and triggers, the panic attacks, the intrusive dreams, the body memories. We talked, Emma, a little earlier, can the body start to feel certain things? So by the time most people are listening, Emma, to your podcast and our discussion, let's say Mary has started to, so she stumbled across the Imagination podcast, and all of a sudden she's listening right now. So that something has drawn her to that. We're going to say that God has arranged that. Okay, but Mary has been living with these different dynamics, the voices, but hasn't wanted to say anything. Okay, it's probably time now to begin to risk believing that there are parts. Okay, and this is ultimately where, as talked about before, journaling ultimately becomes invaluable. So two things need to take place during the early stage. is you need to risk believing that this is real. Okay, it doesn't make you crazy. This is real. And each of these parts, the times you lose track of time or the gaps, it's safe to say, unless it was really super triggering. So we'll just talk about during the day. Let's say this. How many outfits did you change into today? Okay. It's not uncommon that maybe there were 4 outfits you changed into. Now, some people say, no, I didn't. I've gotten to a point where I lay them out ahead of time. Okay, but why do you do that? Well, because I was changing 4 outfits during the day. I was running late to work. Okay, so you at least got a system that helps. But why did you do that? Because you found that there was some crazy making going on. Okay. But have you ever found that you're getting ready to leave for work or on a date or go somewhere, and before you know it, you changed your outfit or something? There's something that changes. Or do you ever find yourself driving somewhere and before you know it, you can't figure out where you are? Now, that could have to do with these parts, but usually, quite frankly, that's going to have to do with these parts, okay? Because that's a little more profound that's tapping into a little deeper kind of pain, okay, or dynamics. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is come to a point in time for Mary. The first thing she's going to do is come to recognize that this aspect of herself, this level, is not crazy, and that she needs to be willing to start communicating. And how you do that? Okay, 2 things. Even right now, if you're listening to this, if you've got parts, trust me, they're listening too, and they're probably, in a way, they're probably doing one of 2 things. They're either rooting you on or rooting me on, saying, yeah, tell her, right? Tell Mary, we've been trying to talk to her. Or they might be a little concerned and therefore suddenly they went quiet. So if it is unusually quiet, or if you're starting to hear like a lot of inner confirmation, then you know what? Take note of that. Now, if it's unusually quiet, the question is this: why, just because you're watching this video, is it unusually quiet? Where did all that previous internal activity go? Why is it suddenly quiet? When did it get quiet? My hunch is it got quiet as the chart started to come up. Why would that cause everything to go quiet? It could be either they are also starting to find out, because remember what also happens. And this is kind of an interesting thing. I think it's safe to say that when Dana comes out, Dana knows that she's helping Mary, but also it might be safe to say that sometimes Dana forgets that this really is what's going on. Now, that may sound funny. It's not to say that Dana forgets that Dana's a part, but it also could mean that maybe Dana knows there are times that she's gotten overwhelmed. And when Dana started to, this is very true, okay, that Dana pulls, oh, hold on here. Dana pulled, oh gosh, okay, we got to get our little circles. Okay, so Dana pulled Mary in, but before Dana knows it, it's almost like the argument started, the frustration was increasing, and before you know it, Dana can't remember how it ended. So sometimes, if Dana starts to really realize that she is here for Mary, now that might sound funny because on one level, Dana knows very much, but also because it's been so automatic, it's more comfortable for Dana just to do what Dana does. But if Dana begins to realize that there can be times that Dana dissociates, then that starts to mean that what, right? That there's more to this whole thing, that all of them more than meets the eye, which ultimately also means that they've been impacted. Okay, different ball game then, right? Because now it's going to mean that there really is deeper levels of pain. that can't just be managed in the here and now, that we have to start doing some therapy. Okay. So these two levels, the co-conscious level and the conscious awareness level, these parts would be okay never doing therapy. As a matter of fact, these parts might be okay doing just behavioral therapy. And it would work, right? If there wasn't anything else under the surface. But the fact that there are parts presupposes what? Presupposes that things became overwhelming early on. But that level doesn't have much conscious awareness. They're co-conscious with Mary, but they don't know. So each level knows what's happening on the next level up, but they don't really know what happens in the level beneath. So the proposition then, as you're beginning to get to know Mary, and these parts are starting to show up in session, and now you're starting to have, in a way, you're establishing rapport with each of these parts. And this could be a number of months, if not, well, certainly you're then always going to see them. So in the first couple of months, it really then is you beginning to get to know them. And as you get to know them, remember early on, we talked about how the therapeutic relationship, we're just going to move this down here for a second. The therapeutic relationship will do what? It will have a tendency to pull up those deeper wounds, right? Those parts that are wounded, those parts. So there can be an increasing degree of angst by the parts that have been helping in the everyday, because they're starting to get a sense of what? That there's more to them, more to the system that meets the eye, which also then means two things. That there's greater degrees of emotions than they're aware of. And what do they do? Because all they know is sometimes they get triggered, and before you know it, who comes out? Right. And so, like Dana there can handle the more mild stuff, but she doesn't know that when it gets to level 5, let's say from a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being nuclear rage, when it gets to a 4 or a 5, Dana doesn't know that she now all of a sudden gets pulled in. Well, then the question is, and Dana internally has a sense of this. Wait a second, and then Mary also is feeling it. That wait a second, when it gets a certain level, yeah, I come out, but then to find out probably two things. One, she'll probably feel Dana will feel, well, I'm not what I can't handle it. But then the question is, what happens? Why can't I remember? What can't? So you can see then all of them are very connected up top, because they get very disconcerted when they realize they can't remember. Because now, how are you supposed to protect Mary if you can't remember? Dana's supposed to be there to protect Mary, but when it gets, level 4, level 5, and all of a sudden, even Dana gets pulled in. So first of all, Dana pulls Mary in. This is all subconscious in a way, or unconscious, right? But then it gets to, so the Walmart cashier is starting to get moving from obnoxious to irritating to upsetting to all of a sudden aggressive. The moment that happens, that aggression was more than she's comfortable with. All of a sudden, Dana gets pulled in, and Dana probably then gets pulled into back to her level. As a matter of fact, I know she does, because now Jimmy comes out and handles it. Well, then after the cashier has been put in her place, and Jimmy says, "Meet me outside," or I'll, starts to reach over, grab the cashier by the throat or something. Then all of a sudden, when the threat is taken care of very forthrightly, now the threat is gone. And then what happens? So it's back to what level? It's back to 0. Now let me, as a matter of fact, it's probably confusing you all. Okay. And I know, gosh, what I have to do is, just so everybody can see this, I'm going to enlarge it. My apologies here, because I know sometimes, there we go. So thank you all for hanging in there, right? Because now you can read the different, okay, I'll shrink this just a little bit, but sometimes it helps if you can actually see what I've written there. Okay, so there we go. So remember, Jimmy came out, so it's like the third level of defense or second level. We'll just call it third level because at first Mary's trying to handle it. So that's first level. So the tension is going from level 1 to 2. So let's say 10 is the top level tension. So it goes from 1 to 2. And now Mary starts to feel the anxiety, which is adrenaline because of the knapsacks, remember? So all of a sudden, Dana steps in, pulls Mary in when it reaches 2. So now Dana's tackling it, now going back and forth. It's now reaching 2, 3, 4, and now it's reached 5. But we don't know because this other cashier or the cashier is starting to match and is starting to escalate. And so what happens when it reaches a certain threshold, then the next line of defense comes in and it happens in a split second. And so certainly then this would be what Mary has described in the past, an anger blackout. So Jimmy's there, punches the, does something pretty radical to solve the issue very forthrightly. By now, the management has come out. We've got different things, right? All hell can break loose. But then all of a sudden, because it went really radical in a way, what happens? The issue suddenly calms down. And so I'm sorry. So Dana got pulled in to her level. And once it goes from 5, 6, 7 back to 0, because it's calm, well, who can come back out now? But it also may be that initially what comes out, or what part comes out, maybe an anxious part. Let's also find, we could have a guilty part. I'm just looking, you know what? I'm probably going to have to create some other parts. Huh? Sorry, that's kind of funny. But maybe the guilty part came out. Oh, that wasn't very Christian. I can't believe. So we could actually have two. Now, these two are battling under the surface, right? We showed that before. Only one's out, but right. Oh, I can't believe it. It's going to be horrible. And the cops are going to be called. And oh, how am I ever going to face the pastor? Look what I did. A good Christian doesn't, right? So we can have all this switching because it really triggered some core, deeper, intense, because it feels familiar in a more threatening way. That's when it shifted, by the way. That's when it shifted. When it starts to get agitated, it's at this level. But when it starts to become more overwhelming, so this level is there to kind of help manage, of course they are, right? The level 2s and 3s and 4, but when it suddenly goes to a deeper level, now we've tapped into, where did we just do? Okay, there we go. We just tapped into now a deeper level, what we would call subconscious part, to try to handle things. Okay, so eventually, let's say the manager is called or whatever, and things are calmed down, and Mary comes back. Now Mary has challenge because does Mary remember what happened and what words were exchanged? And she doesn't remember any of that, but she has to fake it because she's either going to sound crazy. So you've got a lot of, now what was, by the way, what was the body, right? What was triggered? You've got the adrenal glands. You have a surge of adrenaline. We call that, right, a panic attack, or what's going to happen with the heartbeat. So Mary is feeling all sorts of what, right? She's feeling all of Jimmy's aggression. It started with Dana's, and now, the defensiveness, and now we had aggressiveness, but Mary doesn't have the memories. And so all she knows is she's got tachycardia, she's got blood pressure issues, and she feels crazy, and she might even just leave her groceries behind. Now, again, it doesn't have to mean they got into it with with the cashier. But again, something could have triggered something earlier. I'm using now a different analogy. Let's say everything was fine and a panic attack happened. Panic attacks are from this level. Okay. And in a way, oftentimes, okay, let me add something and then we may, and this will kind of review a little bit, but if you're having a panic attack, it also very much could be that childlike part is trying to get through And a lot of these are now going into damage control mode because Tina is starting to come through, or a memory is triggering and almost pulling Tina up. And so everybody's going in damage control mode to try to keep things together. So that's where sometimes a panic attack would come from. And think about those of you that experience panic attacks. What happens oftentimes after a panic attack? Does that ring a bell? Self-harm, or really, in a way, compulsivity. Here, all of a sudden, they just have to go have a lot of sex, or just something. They have to go drink. They have to go self-anesthetize. But self-harm oftentimes is very effective, right? And those of you that do have self-harm, somebody that doesn't understand it will not understand. It's like, what? How can cutting soothe or take away? Because greater pain wins out. This was a little bit of review, but hopefully adding additional dynamics. Because now, next time, because I'm aware of the time, and I figure what we'll do is we'll kind of bring it to, this was very much what I would say is review, but hopefully then it's understandable how you can have this switching and then a deeper level of switching. This is where the more intense feelings are under this layer. So for instance, in therapy, it's going to be a process of first getting to know your kind of co-conscious or everyday parts. But then little by little, and this is where journaling is so important, because behind each of these are going to be corresponding ones that need to have a say. Because ultimately, you're going to have to, as a therapist, these are the ones that are going to be the next level that you're going to have to get to know. And every now and then, just like we showed, you're going to see Jimmy. But then Jimmy's going to do what? Jimmy's going to drop down. You may find that you're talking, you get to know Dana for a while, but then all of a sudden, as a therapist, you're going to see a different degree of intensity that goes away just as quickly as it appeared. So you're then connecting with, in the same category of intensity, or the same category of feel of like protectiveness, but there's a whole different qualitative feel. So first it's going to be us getting to know, and the client, and getting to know their everyday parts, getting a sense of them, beginning that free flow of information. That's where journaling comes in. So you're going to get to know that first level. But then the reason you're in therapy is ultimately there's been hurt. The flip side of hurt is anger. So there's been wounds. That's where these contain a fair degree of pain management. So they're aware of deeper level stuff, but they haven't wanted to come out with it. Okay, so that's why at first you're only going to see these parts briefly. Just as the very first, you only saw these parts briefly. Now, once these parts get to trust you, you're going to see them as the primary current primary parts. So in session, Mary comes in, and before you know it, pretty much the session is going to be working with all the primary co-conscious parts. So in one session, let's say in an hour session, I could have spoken to each of these, and there'll be variations, right? Of Dana, there's going to be a couple maybe that deal with the defensiveness, or the Robins and the Stephanies. It may be in one session, I've talked to all of them multiple times. I started with Mary, and it may be that I end with Mary. Now, the question is, has Mary been in the session? Of course she has. So the co-conscious parts have been helping Mary work through issues. Because let's say Mary's slacking, she'd call it, she's not, or Mary never slacks, but let's say, and that's what Dana would say, she's slacking at work. Okay, so Mary is falling behind because quite frankly, Mary is taking on too many knapsacks, or has too many knapsacks ultimately from way down here, right? She really from the people that hurt her and abused her. Oh, sorry. Okay, so we're going to begin on this level. We're going to also talk about boundaries. We're going to talk about some functional stuff, make sure that Mary can function at work. So we're going to talk about communication skills. We're going to talk about problem solving skills. And we're also going to begin to help challenge these parts to figure out why they get triggered and where do they go when they get triggered. Because that's then starting to help them realize, okay, there's more to this. And so it may be, well, the fact is, they are not really looking forward to learning about those parts, but it's a journey. But the more you get to know all these parts as a therapist, or the more, if you're the client, the more you get to know them, then what'll happen, the same idea with Tina, how they're pulled up because truth is pulling them up and they're starting to sense a little bit of hope, you're going to find that they will show themselves more. So you're really underway into the active stage of therapy. Not that nobody's active, but it's kind of like the beginning stages and then the active stage, meaning you're really starting to get into deeper stuff because remember, all these have more intense emotions which come out when they're triggered, when they feel overwhelmed, when they don't feel safe, when they can sense Mary and Dana are overwhelmed. That's when Jimmy has to. And now, as you begin to interact with, and this is really when therapy goes from first gear to second gear, it doesn't mean that when I call Dana first gear therapy, it doesn't mean that Dana isn't important. It just means it's starting to really gain traction. It's just I hope that comes across properly, right? And so once you're able to start to gain the trust of these parts, and what'll mean is they're going to have to risk too, because how about the flirtatious one? Well, you have a lot of these that have also been keeping Sally at bay, right? And so part of it, and we'll go into a little more recently, or a little, I'm sorry, in the next episode as we pick up, that you can have some of these that are not only trying to keep these parts at bay, but you're also trying to make sure, these parts are also trying to make sure that certain of these parts don't create a ripple effect and don't do anything in the everyday life that's going to screw things up. Like go out to a bar and meet a guy and take him to the back seat of your vehicle, right? Because, oh my gosh, look at, what could happen. Okay. And then if you have parts, so all of a sudden that's what happens. And now we've met a guy in the back seat of a vehicle. But also if there are, what? If there are, so now they're having sex with somebody they just met. And what happens if being touched brings up on a deep level some of this stuff? Well, now it reverberates all the way up. And so one act by Sally can do what? Now we've got, it's like an earthquake, right? We've got these temblors, it starts and now it really shakes. And then you have aftershocks. Well, then it triggers. So there we go. We have self-harm, we have self-deprecating, and so now self-harm, including probably the internal COO. They're gonna go after Sally. Different parts are going to really get down on her. So Sally then, on some level, well, Sally feels increasingly isolated, which means she says, "Well, screw you. Then every man for themselves, and I'm going to have fun every now and then." Right? So that's where you get the chaos on the inside. So it's important for both the therapist to work methodically, to also know that these dynamics, these issues, every now and then are going to come up, meaning a part is going to come to the surface that's going to shake up the system that's then going to have internal war going on. I don't know. People are get down on each other, or parts. I'm sorry, parts are going to right. Parts are going to get down, and so every now and then things can come to a screeching halt because now you've got self-punishment going on. But for the client, what you need to know is, so let me help make sense of this. Now I'm going to cover this up so not as to overwhelm you. Just need to know that it's going to be a process, little by little, of you getting to know this level. And then just know as you get used to them, don't be surprised. So maybe this is the best way. And actually, it's going to happen. So you don't need to get discouraged, or you don't need to freak out, or don't need to get anxious. Just know this. As things are starting to move along in therapy, and you got more and more increasing free flow of information as far as kind of what's been triggering you, every now and then, because you're going to then be able to tolerate things longer because you're gaining skills, then before you know it, because you probably have people in your life that are selfish, right? Because that helpful part, the dutiful part, you haven't had boundaries up to this up to this point. So now you're going to start to have boundaries, and that will start to create friction. It's going to start to shake up some relationships. And when that happens, it's going to reverberate now at a deeper level. Okay. And when that happens, now you're going to start to have the dissociation that happens from those deeper levels, which means there's going to be things that start to happen. Okay. So when Sally comes out, guess where you're going to go? Now, we need to work with that. Okay. But all of a sudden, where Mary's always been very dutiful and responsible, all of a sudden, what's she starting to do? Starting to become very spontaneous and irresponsible. So that's where a big, okay, as a matter of fact, think about then the internal. So just as we had different parts that were communicating internally, now we've got what kind of war going on at a deeper level, much more profound. So the compulsive, overly responsible one is going after the spontaneous, irresponsible one. And it's at a level that these guys don't know what to do with, because now their cognitive behavioral stuff, the things they've practiced, it's not working. And it can feel like the system is breaking down. It's not. You're going to a deeper level. And so ultimately what you want is eventually just know, and this is the goal, you're going to get to know deeper parts of you. And you're going to begin to, and I like how Frank Anderson puts it, they are there to protect, and they're doing the best they can, ultimately, to protect Mary. Okay, that was a little bit more review and a little bit of a view of how, again, you can have the dissociation upon dissociation in a way. So how about that, Emma? We'll leave it at this point, and then we'll pick up, starting with what's it like when a little bit more of this. So we're certainly going to talk more about the suppressed parts, but then we're going to start to inch into, we're at the middle stage of therapy, which will be these parts, which can also be, of course, that's when it gets really intense. Okay, so that's where we're going.
Terrific. That was
How's that?
awesome. Great presentation, as always. I love the graphics that you've come up with and that you kind of edited on the spot if you need to make an
Yeah,
example.
everybody's seeing it live.
Well, it's good. You're creating actual, real life examples that somebody could picture, and then you're showing a scenario with the different parts on how that all works together. So that's super helpful, John. And like I said, there's been a lot of people that have commented how helpful this has been for them, whether they have a partner that has DID or just learning and having trouble visualizing it. If you haven't experienced this, myself included, this can be really hard to comprehend that something like this could exist in somebody. And actually getting to see it adds a different dynamic, adding a visual to anything. I love when survivors bring art on the show or some type of even photos, that show things. It's really helpful for us to kind of connect our eyes to our brain. So I really appreciate what you're doing, and you're really paving the way for people to understand this more from a very clinical perspective, and I'm really excited to dig more into this chart with you, and to go deeper into this and to help people get an understanding of both therapy and how to be a help on the other side if maybe you're a therapist or some type of a helper or supporter of a survivor. So thank you so much, John, for all the work that you've put into this and for providing this information for us.
It's a pleasure to work with you. And I guess that's what we're doing, right? We're helping hopefully provide a service. We're helping to provide hope and encouragement and normalize what can
Yes.
be a very tricky thing, especially if someone ultimately at the end of the day, this degree of complexity on the inside. I don't use that to discourage. It's just when you look at that chart, um, for those that have really been on the receiving end of very sadistic, intentional, so the SRA, MK Ultra, it's to give them hope that if I, as an outsider, shall we say, as a therapist, like a coach, right? I'm on the sideline looking in. If I've been able to kind of figure this out, I would say I've got a pretty good grasp of it to be able to draw this out, and by the people will be able to tell, how, right? Stick with us. We'll find out if John knows what he's talking about. The good news is this: it's a roadmap then, right? It's like we're going on safari through deep dark Africa or the Amazon, and the question is, does your tour guide, does the trailblazer, whatever analogy, does the coach know what he's doing? And so the reason I bring that up is I want to give people hope that if you have felt programmed, if you have felt that there's electrical impulses, and again, is there the possibility? There's always the possibility of anything, but like the pain that people feel in their head, oftentimes that could be parts. So the good news is, even the most complex of all SRA, okay, one of the gals, let's say Mary, so I worked with, just use her name. I worked with Mary for 8 years, 250 parts. How do I know? Because I met him. How do I know? Because I've got samples of handwriting. But 250, yeah. No, you can't have it. It's hard to believe, isn't it? And this is coming from a therapist that didn't believe in this in the first place. But when you see it, you can't deny it, right? Or you have to deny everything you've ever worked with any client. When you see somebody in distress, when you see anxiety, but especially when you see different personality states, different voice inflections, different handwriting, when you see things change right in session, when you see drawings come up, and then you see the person say, I didn't draw that, and they're freaked out by what they've drawn. When they're not in it for attention seeking, when they don't want to be in your office, when they start denying everything. Okay. The good news, in my estimation, is this: there's an end point, meaning the healing is possible. What do I mean by that? Ultimately, the entire system working together as a team. I personally don't believe in integration. I used to. I used to think that was the goal. I don't think it's possible. And don't get discouraged by that. Don't get freaked out if somebody's, because I just recently, as a matter of fact, this past week, heard someone I truly believe a survivor who has D.I.D. She talked about one of her parts integrated and went away, and she's grieving the loss of it. Okay, so I wouldn't tell her. It's a tricky thing. I wouldn't tell her it didn't happen. But from my perspective, is I think what happened is that part tucked herself away, got a message that it would be better if she wasn't here. Well, so where did that part go? Didn't integrate. Now, again, this may discourage, I don't want to discourage anybody, but Okay, in my estimation, what happened? She's just now tucked away, but she's still listening. I think she sensed from the primary person, let's say in the interview, I think that part of her sensed that, maybe heard the pain that part was bringing about because the choices and decisions, and maybe it'd be better if I wasn't here. Well, that's very altruistic, honestly. And so she went away. So she integrated. She didn't. What did she do? That part got a message that it wasn't okay for her to be here. So she sealed herself off. That's my perspective. So the problem, in my estimation, or what that survivor might anticipate, is there will be points where she will still be triggered in the future, have buttons and triggers, or right, if a part of her is walled off, then when stress gets to a point, what's going to happen? I have to dissociate. So, in my estimation, I don't want any part to go away. If they're there, then they're there. I just want everybody to start working together and know every part of you is valuable, just as valuable as any other part. I feel like saying, okay, we've got a football team and you can only have 11 on the field, so everybody else on the bench, we have to fire you all or go away. I don't ever want to see you again. No, it's not. That's Everybody's really important. It's a big team. Do you know how many football players come out of the tunnel? Right? There's because how many players can be played during the game? A lot. So we don't want anybody going away because you can't go away. It's just risk believing that it's normal. That's a strange way of putting it, but it is. So everybody's important. Everybody has something to say. Everybody has legitimate feelings. So as that acceptance part takes place, then everything will start to settle down. And then I'll tell you what happens. I'd rather have a football team with a lineup, I don't know the term, a roster, yeah, of 75 players than ones with, no, we only have 11 on the field, or in American football, right? The NFL. I only need 11, no more than that. Okay. Give me a team with 75, I'll tell you what, we're going places. But if it's just 11, that's going to get tiring. So I honor every one of my players, so to speak, and find out, oh, okay, what position do you play? And when did you come on the team? And that way we can play to everybody's strengths. There you go.
That's a terrific analogy. I love that. Thank you so much, John. And remind people where they can find you online, because I want everybody to go support you. And you have a bunch of places that you reside.
That's true. I've got three primary websites. The primary one is survivorsupport.net. That is a good resource for people to do adjunct therapy. That's the purpose of this site. Start from the left, move to the right, and there's podcasts on there as well. It'll take you a long time, and it's just really to prompt thought, to in a way trigger a little bit, not in a negative way, especially under the Insights tab. But again, start from left to right and keep journaling. Okay, so it's to keep things going during the week, from session to session, or to determine whether or not this is actually true. And could you possibly have parts? Okay. The next is more of my more research training site, and that is churchprotect.org. So that has some of my own, well, all my own work, but under the truths tabs, you'll see more of my clinical work. Plus, with that one under Insights, if you want to know what I do on social media, that's become my Dropbox. Because at any point in time, I always know I'm going to get kicked off of social media. So you can see from month to month, or if you want to kind of see what I'm doing, if you actually don't want to go onto my Twitter page, you can kind of see, I try to choose some of the more thought-provoking ones. And then the last one is a real area of concern is about the trans movement, because the trans movement is a predator's playground, okay, because it has to do with dumbed down intuition. So it's called unmasking the trans movement. We're just getting back up and running. Brad Wilder, our wonderful producer who has 40 years of broadcast experience, he's the real deal. He volunteers his time. I volunteer my time. He had a severe heart attack a couple of months ago. We're going to begin recording again. So in a couple of days. So we're going to slowly get back up and running with that. We have a BitChute channel entitled the same thing, and we have a YouTube channel where you can find actually probably a few more of the most recent ones. There we go. So Scott Nugent was the last recording that we did. So that was a couple months ago. One way you can help us is get word out. You can see we have very few subscribers, but don't let that confuse you with the quality of the information. It kind of saddens me. It doesn't discourage me, but if people understood what they have access to, we should have millions of subscribers. Every parent, every church, every decent school. Okay, these are clinical interviews. These are content driven. So I personally line up these interviews, or the majority of them. Dr. Ann Gillies is my co-host. She has a PhD. She's written a number of books. And so if you want fact-based information, this is the best place that I know of online. So it's sad we only have how many? Less than 400. So this is a labor of love. So if you scroll through it, I mean, it's just outstanding information. So I encourage you, if you want to get word out. So we have physicians, we have clinicians, we have subject matter experts on that site. And again, predators love the trans movement. They love it's second to only churches, and that's why there's churchprotect.org. There's a blog that I haven't really written for a while, but the content's excellent. But it is survivorsupport.us. So you can get there either through this or directly to Survivor Support US. What you see with that link is it comes up in order of how many people, how many views. And that's one of the primary ones that are on there about the trans movement, and the rest a lot on predators because of my work with sex offenders. So those are the three sites, and then my YouTube channel. And that has a smattering of everything I do, including us, Emma. So if somebody wants a brief version of what we've done in the past two, they can go to mine. But again, if they want the full deal, that's where they want to stay on your channel. So if you only have a limited amount of time, you can go to mine. But if you want the full entire interview, go to yours. So the different things I do, so you can see I posted one, the most recent one of ours, and then all of a sudden you can see 3 on imprecatory prayers. That is my podcast that I do on Friday nights called Journey to Healing. And you can access that under the podcast tab of survivorsupport.net. That is really one of the things that's also near and dear to my heart, because it is important counseling concepts. So I really encourage everybody to go listen to those. I'm doing a series on forgiveness, what it is versus what it is not. Emphasis on what it is not. And then, gosh, I'm up to like 25, but there's going to be about 50 episodes. That's about 50 hours of teaching on forgiveness, okay, because it's such an important issue. But then the rest is on boundaries. And that is the other issue. So it all comes down to boundaries and what happens when I have people that have crossed my boundaries. Who do I have to forgive, or when is it appropriate? So you can see the smattering of different things. It's a repository on my YouTube channel. There we go. Those are some of the resources.
It's terrific. And then John's Twitter also at Uhler_John. John posts every podcast that he does. He posts all the latest articles, whether it's for the trans movement, for survivors, for therapy. He calls out a lot of people on here too, so you can kind of see
I do. As a matter of fact, if you want to scroll down, I hit the furries again.
oh yeah, you did today.
Yeah,
That's right.
someone forwarded me, right? And I need to put the link, but if you go, I'd never heard of that. So hot off the press, this was today. Rowan Year, ROANYER.com. Oh my gosh. Oh, there's a live chat person. Isn't that special? So I'll probably have to put the link up, but as a matter of fact, the screenshot, if you click on that, it should say rowaner.com. There we go. Look at that. Furry fandom, a bunch of deviants. So you can chat with some. Oh, I can only imagine what that one's like. Right? Who's manning that? What is this? So it just shows you it's so deviant. So by their own admission, when they do their own research, right?
Yeah.
It's bad news. So what adults want to do, have at it, but don't go after minors. But you watch all the furry fandom. You would think if they're legitimate, they would be the first ones to say, you know what, this adult only. We don't want kids. But no, you say they're not appropriate to minors and they get all agitated. Well, now they've just revealed what they're all about. So if you want to be deviant, just like if you want to be a drag queen, stay in the club, be a drag queen. I don't care. But don't start reading to little kids in libraries. Don't go to schools because there's only one reason. You notice you're not going to old folks' homes reading. Okay, so if you want to be a furry, but be adult enough to say we're not appropriate for kids. You watch that. Watch how agitated they get. So also with porn, you watch the people that defend porn, and they all start to go together. So we
Yeah.
cannot compromise, by the way, on the issue of safeguarding. And men that are into all this stuff, they're into porn. And porn does a number on male minds. And that's why any survivor needs to know it wasn't about them. I mean, they're not the reason for their abuse. These are deviant adults, deviant men that were porn fueled. And even before porn, there was deviance, but you won't find any sex abuser now, sex offender, that's not into porn. So survivors need to know that they were not the cause of their abuse. And if it wasn't them, that the perps would have found another kid. So there I go.
Amen. And I encourage you guys, if you guys want, if you guys are on Twitter, please go follow John. Like I said, he's constantly posting on there. You guys can keep up with him day to day instead of maybe weekly, just on a podcast where he's talking about a specific topic. His Twitter, he talks about everything under the sun that he's passionate about. So you guys can keep up with all the latest stuff day to day and daily. His YouTube channels are fantastic. As you guys can see, there were so many videos on there for you guys, absolutely for free, which is fantastic, and on his website under the insights tabs and on his blog, and you guys can access the podcast there as well. But there are so many hours of content on his survivor support website also, and I'm going to have that in the show notes. And John, I'm really grateful for you. Thank you so much for coming on again today.
Emma, you're more than welcome. Thank you for this opportunity. It's been the right thing at the right time for me to finally put down in somewhat systematic fashion. I'm aware of the fact I do circumlocution and tangential thinking, but you're to be commended. I encourage everybody to support you. My stuff, I don't have a membership or anything. I'm called to do what I'm called to do. My what I do, full-time therapy, that brings in my income. But I encourage people to support you. You have a number of channels where they can become members. And I really encourage that because bless your heart, right? You're doing this for free. And when I've seen how many years and how many episodes you've produced, so I want to commend you and I want to encourage any viewer to go to you've got a number of ways that people can support you. You always talk about that at the very beginning, but seriously, people need to sign up. Just know they're supporting you and will help you keep doing what you're doing. So that's my plug for you.
Thanks, John. That goes both ways. We are all in this together. We all have our piece to the puzzle, and I'm so grateful that we can collaborate our puzzle pieces together and create a really cool series for people to follow. So this is awesome. It's really fun to have these reoccurring episodes. When I first started this podcast, that was one of the things I was passionate about was sort of taking a concept from like a TV show where people get to know a guest, because that was always something that I always disliked about podcasts. You'd hear an amazing guest and then you wouldn't hear from them again for another couple years. And I'm like, you need to bring that person on again, you know? So I try to do that as much as possible with people. I think it's good to have something ongoing, something to build on, different topics to explore deeper than maybe just, an hour to 3 hour episode. There's so much more that we can do when we're consistently working together. So this is really awesome. I'm learning so much from you. I know everybody else is. Everybody, please go support John. Go check out his content. He has so many hours of free content for you guys. Free therapy, essentially, especially great for those of you who maybe aren't ready for therapy or therapy curious and just want to get to know sort of what to expect and, take some notes on different questions to ask your therapist and just to understand the journey that you'll be going on. And obviously to recognize if your therapist is not taking you down that journey and that maybe you need to find a different therapist. So there's so much good that John is producing for us. If you're an ally, please go check out also the trans movement content that he creates. This is something that impacts everybody. A lot of people want to look away from that topic too, and it's really important. It's affecting our kids more than ever, and it is horrific, all the different ways that perverted adults are infiltrating society to get access to kids right in plain view, and we need to nip that in the butt, you guys. So please go subscribe. I'll have all of John's links below. I'll have all my links below. I'm so grateful for you guys and all your support. We couldn't do this without you. God bless you all, and we will see you next time.